Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, a mobile phone game released in November of 2024, offering a gacha gameplay loop of turn-based combat, levels, and character progression. The hope of the game was to have players engage on a deeper level with the Jujutsu Kaisen cast, as well as provide an interactive story experience that the audience wouldn't receive anywhere else. Because this original story, which is actually officially canon and worked on by series creator Gege Akutami themselves, is locked behind a gacha game, many Jujutsu Kaisen fans are completely missing out on what is, in my opinion, an amazing and fully fleshed out narrative to the series we all know and love. There's also plenty of special story elements of Jujutsu Kaisen explored in Phantom Parade that you can't get anywhere else, such as what happens when a binding vow gets broken, or how the villains get the idea to construct such a complicated barrier for the Shibuya incident in the first place. We'll be exploring all of those fun lore drops, as well as the in-depth and unique character interactions you can only get in Phantom Parade, and more, all here in this video. So hit that like button, grab a snack, and get comfortable, because if you're a Jujutsu Kaisen fan, you are going to want to experience this story. But first, a word from this video's sponsor, GamerSupps. Listen, if you need an energy drink that's gonna keep you going throughout the day while also not making you crash, and at the same time it's giving you a bunch of vitamins like C, D, and even some nootropics to keep you energized, that's GamerSupps for you. The reason why they're super cool is because not only if you've never tried them before, they'll give you a free sample if you use my code NOOP, they'll also just give you 10% off your order if you use the code anyway. Try some flavors from your favorite anime like JoJo's or Darling in the Franxx. Again, use my link in the description or code NOOP for 10% off your order, or if you're a new customer, go get some free samples on me and I guarantee you'll be buying some more. Thank you GamerSupps for sponsoring the channel. Also, real quick before we begin, if you'd be interested at all in seeing my blind reaction to any of this story, as well as going through the cutscenes and gameplay as you're supposed to experience it, feel free to check out the gaming channel No Operator Live, where you'll be able to see all of the chapters of my Phantom Parade playthrough uploaded consistently with the story video release, as the first 4 chapters are already uploaded and ready to watch. And without further ado, thank you so much for watching, and let's get right into Phantom Parade. Our story begins just a few days before the Goodwill Exchange event, a sorcerer exam held between the Jujutsu High's Kyoto and Tokyo schools. While making preparations for the event, Principal Masamichi Yaga receives a phone call and is surprised to hear that it's an old friend on the other line. The person on the phone asks Yaga how the exchange event is shaping out, and Yaga wishes that he would have had the time to invite his friend's students as well. This old friend of Yaga's says while he would have loved to have had the chance to meet Sukuna's vessel, Itadori Yuji, in person, currently he and his students have their own problems beginning to stir on their home turf, saying that what's most important is Yaga making sure the exchange event goes smoothly, as if the situation continues, he might have to ask Yaga for help. A couple days later, after the chaos of the Goodwill event is handled, we're introduced to a mysterious curse spirit that we've never met before, surveying the ruins of the exchange event from the shadows. The curse spirit mentions how it originally believed it would have had to alter its grand plans based on the existence of Sukuna's vessel. But after watching the exchange event unfold, the mysterious curse believes that they can actually use Yuji to their advantage. The scene fading to black as the curse wanders off, revealing that it's almost time for everything to begin. Meanwhile, fully healed up from their battles at the exchange event, the trio of first years at Tokyo Jujutsu High, Itadori Yuji, Kugisaki Nobara, and Fushiguro Megami are all assembling at the front of an abandoned elementary school for an exorcism. After receiving a phone call from their teacher Satoru Gojo, he instructs the students to place a bunch of curse amulets around the school to ward off curse spirits that are flocking to the area. Ijichi places down a veil, and the sorcerers begin their mission. But after a short search around the school, they immediately notice that most of the curse spirits have already been exorcised, leaving behind nothing but residuals, putting Megami on alert, as this means a curse user could be involved. They hear a loud boom down the hallway, and as the three investigate, they are introduced to a blonde teenage girl about their age, dressed in an old-school sailor's uniform, cursed talismans wrapped around her fists. The trio have absolutely no idea who this person is, and are immediately on guard because Megami can tell from one glance she's an experienced sorcerer. However, to make things even more confusing, when the unknown girl notices them, she immediately knows who they are, saying it's about time the Tokyo students showed themselves. After finding out which of the 3 students is Itadori, the mysterious woman declares to everyone present that she vows to become more famous than Yuji Yuji ever is, which, as someone set for execution, comes off as extremely weird and out of touch. But the trio doesn't have much time to think about any of this, as the girl immediately runs off again, announcing she's going to prove her superiority to the Tokyo students by exercising more curses than they can. The trio decides that they should simply complete their mission. However, it becomes impossible to ignore the woman's presence when her constant battling is not only attracting more curses to the area, but also severely damaging the already dilapidated building. Finding the girl again, she is clearly being overwhelmed by the number of curses she's fighting, and Yuji jumps in to help, only to get attacked himself and told to stay out of the way, as she refuses to give up until she proves herself stronger than the famous Itadori Yuji. After the last of the curses are finished up, the woman finally introduces herself as Saki Rindo, a first-year student at Jujutsu High Fukuoka branch. Everyone is rightfully confused, as they thought there were only 2 schools for Jujutsu in the country, and after calling to confirm with Ijichi, the attendant tells the trio to come back to headquarters and bring Saki Rindo with them, as Fukuoka's principal is there, waiting for her. The 4 students arrive back at Jujutsu High, and Gojo introduces the trio to Kensuke Nagino, the official principal of Fukuoka branch, and the old friend that Yaga was on the phone with in the introduction. Upon meeting Nagino, the man instantly takes a liking to Yuji, saying that he idolized Itadori from afar ever since he heard Yuji's story, claiming the fact Yuji's able to maintain his sanity while having the King of Curses sealed within him is impressive. And Nagino has a passion for students with great potential, which kinda makes it obvious how Rindo came to misunderstand Yuji's situation. Nagino confirms Fukuoka is indeed a real branch of Jujutsu High, only due to its small size, it's only officially recognized as a subsection under Tokyo. Nagino gets right to the point and explains he's here to ask for their help, as recently the surrounding area of Fukuoka, Kyushu, has become plagued by a massive cursed energy. But because the area is mostly rural and less populated, there isn't really much of an explanation as to why there's been a sudden uptick in curse activity. Kyushu doesn't have enough sorcerers of its own to handle the increasing threat, and Gojo elects his 3 students to accompany Saki Rindo back to Fukuoka tomorrow and help investigate. Nagino tells the first years that while they're there, his 2 students will be able to show them around, and just before Yuji walks out, Nagino stops him, letting Yuji know that he's personally excited to see how Sukuna's vessel is able to influence the students of Fukuoka. The next day, everyone arrives in Kyushu, and despite Saki Rindo being told to bring the Tokyo students back to Fukuoka with her, she gives them terrible directions and leaves the trio completely stranded on their own to derail their investigation. Thankfully though, a new face introduces themselves and offers to help bring them to campus. This boy is named Kaito Yuki, and he's the other first year currently attending Fukuoka High. Yuki is annoyed that Saki would disobey Nagino's orders so casually, and as the 4 sorcerers share introductions, Yuki actually cuts Itadori off before he can tell Yuki his name, coldly telling Yuji that no introductions are necessary, and Yuki is more than aware of who Yuji is. Reading aloud the tenets of sorcery law, Kaito Yuki wastes no time reminding Yuji that he is scheduled for execution and has no right to exist under Jujutsu code. Nobara and Megami ask Yuki if they're going to have a problem, attempting to stand up for their friend, but Yuki reassures them he means no harm to Yuji, revealing that Nagino ordered Yuki to spare Yuji's life, and sorcery law also dictates that students must obey their superiors. Yuji wonders to himself about how these 2 laws kind of contradict themselves, but Yuki claims in order to reconcile with this, Yuki's decided to neither harm nor befriend Yuji, simply choosing to ignore him and hate Yuji from afar, even if it causes inconveniences to the mission. Just before Yuki can lead the trio to campus though, he receives a call from Rindo, who explains that on the way back, she encountered a curse spirit that was running around in broad daylight. Saki tells Yuki she's going to try and chase it into a safer location, and she wants him to meet her there without the Tokyo students so they can prove they don't need their help. Understanding the danger though, Yuki does bring the Tokyo students along with him, and the sorcerers meet up with Saki just before she enters an abandoned building that the curse escaped into. Yuji admits he's glad they came, as the curse appeared to be much more powerful than someone like Rindo could have handled on her own, but Rindo says she doesn't care about that, and runs full speed into the building on her own, telling Yuki to close the barrier behind her. Yuki doesn't stop the Tokyo Tokyo students though. In fact, he admits he actually wants them to help Rindo because he's worried about her state of mind. Unfortunately, Yuki himself is only a support type sorcerer, so he has no choice but to ask the Tokyo students for assistance. Yuki explains his curse technique works similarly to a veil, so he can close the area off for them once they run in. But before they do, Yuki stops Nobara and says he can't force them to sympathize with Rindo, but he at least wants to explain why she's been acting so reckless lately, revealing that Fukuoka branch was just recently scheduled to be disbanded due to its size not justifying the amount of resources spent on keeping it afloat. Rindo's gotten it into her head that if she's able to prove Fukuoka's strength to the higher ups, they'll have no choice but to keep Fukuoka branch active. Nobara kind of coldly admits that none of that is her problem, and it doesn't excuse Rindo's behavior, but Yuki admits he was just hoping this would make Tokyo more likely to help her. Nobara corrects Yuki though, telling him that the students would have helped Rindo whether she had a good reason to do this or not because she wants to help her, but because Nobara wants to set Rindo straight for pissing her off. Deep inside the abandoned building, Saki finally manages to corner the rogue curse spirit, a gross pink Temu version of Kid Buu that no matter how hard Saki fights against, keeps getting the upper hand against her. However, Saki reveals that this was all a part of her plan, activating her curse technique, Catastrophe Reversal Curse, an ability that converts all of the pain Saki Rindo receives into cursed energy, resulting in Saki dealing more damage the more damage she takes. Rindo exercises the curse spirit with her technique's power, but suddenly from the shadows, the curse reforms itself and strikes a critical blow back on the Fukuoka student, revealing that even though Rindo can convert pain into energy, her injuries don't heal and can still affect her stamina. Just before the curse is able to land a killing blow, Yuji counterattacks and the Tokyo trio rescue Rindo, much to her disappointment. She attempts to get in the Tokyo student's way again, but Nobara straight up knocks Saki Rindo upside the head, sending her flying towards the ground. Yuji and Megumi are surprised, but Nobara takes charge of the situation, commanding Yuji and Megumi to hold off the lesser curses while she talks with Rindo. Saki attempts to get angry at Nobara, but Kukusaki cuts her off, saying that if Rindo wants to fight, that's no problem with Nobara. But what Nobara won't stand for is the desperate attempts to be the hero that are only going to end up getting Rindo killed. Nobara asks if Fukuoka branch staying active is really worth losing her life over, and surprisingly, Rindo says it is, without hesitation. Saki says the teacher that saved her life is more than worth anything she can do, saying she wants to live life the way she wants, working under the man who adopted her, and refuses to let fate tell her where she should be. Something that resonates with Nobara, who remembers the words she told to Yuji all the way back when they first met, realizing that Rindo's more like Nobara than she originally thought. She picks Rindo off the ground and tells her they're going to exercise that curse together, but Nobara will play support and let Rindo take center stage, so that way she keeps all the exorcism credit. Rindo is dumbfounded at first, but agrees and explains how her curse technique works, allowing the two sorcerers to effectively cooperate and exercise the curse for good. In the heat of battle, Saki is impressed by Nobara's tenacity, which gives Rindo the motivation to carry on, despite her body beginning to give out. Rindo asks why Nobara would do something so nice for her, and while Nobara admits she wanted to kick Rindo's ass at first, Nobara would have been a hypocrite if she didn't help another woman trying to live for herself. Everyone exits the building safe and sound, making Yuki happy to see everyone return and the curse get exorcised. And weirdly enough, Saki Rindo has now developed a fascination with Nobara, idolizing her and referring to her now as Sister Bara, almost too similar to a relationship another character has with Yuji, who we'll be getting to shortly. Meanwhile though, Megumi remained in the abandoned building alone to continue his investigation, finding it very weird that a curse was out in broad daylight and would bring them back to such a random place, almost as if this curse had lured them all here intentionally. For what reason, however, Megumi can't be sure of yet. The next day, they report everything that happened to Nagino, and talking with Ijichi, everyone agrees that not only was the entire situation abnormal, the fact that a curse was able to disintegrate and then reassemble itself is the weirdest part of all. With no major events or other negative energies influencing the area, nothing adds up as to why curses have become so rampant in Kyushu lately, making Yuji wonder out loud that, is all of this really a coincidence, or is someone plotting something darker behind the scenes? Megumi wants to get a head start start investigating again, but Nagino tells him they're not allowed to interfere with Fukuoka's investigation, and they're only here in case they need backup for battle, telling the Tokyo students to remain on standby for now, providing them full accommodations and a place to stay so they're completely at home and relaxed while they wait. The next morning, Yuji immediately feels weird about sitting around not doing anything, and Nagino stumbles upon him, asking Yuji if he's bored, telling the Tokyo student to go find Kaito Yuki and help him train, since his Fukuoka students rarely get the chance to gain experience with other sorcerers their age. Yuji's hesitant because of how Yuki feels about him, but Nagino insists, telling Yuji to explain to Yuki that it's Nagino's orders to do so. In the meantime, Nagino says he'll be off to perform solo work in a nearby area called Oita, thinking that Yuji and Yuki will become great friends in no time after they get to know each other. Finding Yuki training alone in a field, Yuji overhears Yuki frustratingly shouting to himself about not being any help in the fight against the curses. Yuki is immediately annoyed at Yuji's presence and at first tries to reject his offer to train until, of course, Yuki finds out it was a direct sorcerer order. While Yuki's still hesitant, he thinks this is the perfect opportunity to get experience exercising Yuji when the time finally comes. Much to Yuji's annoyance, the two actually make great progress in their training, as Yuki uses a cursed dagger in close quarters combat, and Yuji's able to relate to this due to his short time using Slaughter Demon, the cursed knife lent to him by Gojo. Yuki's actually very appreciative of the tips due to neither Nagino or Rindo being experts in curse tools, so it's rare he's actually able to learn anything in that field, describing himself as only kind of a Jujutsu sorcerer, which prompts Yuji to ask what Kaito Yuki means by that, as Yuki seems like a proper Jujutsu sorcerer to him. But before they can go any deeper into it, Yuki gets extremely angry that Sukuna's vessel would try and deceive Yuki into some kind of friendly conversation, claiming that the entire time they were training, Yuki was just actually trying to kill Itadori so that way he could follow Jujutsu law and frame this death as some kind of training accident, which honestly just makes Yuki think it's funny how much harder Yuki makes life for himself by trying so hard to follow the rules. When Yuji and Yuki finish their training, the two sorcerers meet up with Rindo and Nobara for some tourism, shopping, and food, while Fushiguro sneaks out on his own in order to launch a solo investigation, as there was something he needed to be sure of, and it just wouldn't stop bothering him. He heads back to the abandoned building from yesterday, and the place is surprisingly still infested with curses. Since Megumi confirmed Ichichi's report himself by asking around town, he really does not understand why this many high-grade curses would spawn so frequently in such a boring area. Almost certain that the students were lured here for some specific purpose now, the residuals Megumi followed end up stretching off into multiple different directions, and the exploration becomes too complicated for one person to handle, deciding to call it a day and return to the investigation later. Back with the other sorcerers in Tenjin, over Hot Pot, Nobara finally decides to ask what's so special about Fukuoka that would make Saki Rindo fight so hard. And Rindo reveals that she actually used to be a pretty big delinquent in the area, essentially running her own gang and getting into fights constantly. At the time, no one could beat Saki, and she wonders now if the reason for that was because she was subconsciously using cursed energy. However, this reputation ended up backfiring, as one day, Rindo was jumped and had her skull cracked open with a metal bat, getting put into a coma for weeks, but miraculously surviving. From that moment on though, Rindo was able to see curse spirits. Not knowing how to cope with the ability to see things no one else could, Rindo resorted to fighting cursed spirits by her lonesome and ended up making the exact same mistakes as before, almost getting killed by a swarm of curses before Principal Nagino happened upon and rescued her. From that moment on, Nagino basically adopted Rindo, taking her into Fukuoka High and raising her as a Jujutsu sorcerer. Kaito Yuki admits he also has a similar story, although it isn't nearly as exciting or interesting, claiming he's not from a sorcerer clan, nor did he have some kind of resulted in him being able to see the paranormal. One day, Yuki just woke up and his curse technique just came to him, and from then on, just like Rindo, Yuki would be stalked by curses, choosing to hole himself up inside of his room and refusing to leave or come outside, until one day, all of the curses just disappeared, Principal Nagino having been the one to exorcise and remove them from Yuki's home. After that day, Yuki came to Fukuoka of his own accord and asked to be taught how to use his powers under the tutelage of Nagino, clearing up why both sorcerers sorcerers would be so devoted to their principal. Rindo and Yuki admit they could have left Fukuoka at any time. In fact, Kyoto School has made numerous bids for their transfer after Fukuoka finally disbands. Nobara is disgusted at the thought of this though, telling the two of them that no matter what they do, Rindo and Yuki can never go to Kyoto with all those weird and sinister people. And as if summoning the devil himself, Mai Zenin, Momo Nishimiya, and Miwa Kasumi all arrive at the Tenjin Hot Pot restaurant, having heard every word Nobara said behind their backs. Mai thinks, out loud at least, that talking shit about people when they're not around is the weirdest and most sinister thing to do of all, immediately drawing Nobara into an argument with both Mai and Momo, while Miwa just wants to stay neutral. The Kyoto group reveal that they've also been recruited to help with the Fukuoka situation, Mai slyly remarking it's because Tokyo School can't be relied on to properly clean up the mess. This, of course, gets right under Nobara and Saki Rindo's skin, who are beyond fired up and pushing the boys out of the dorm the next day to get a head start on the investigation over the Kyoto girls. The team check in with Fushiguro and find out what he managed to learn on his own search, Megami providing them the coordinates to a couple of curse residuals that might lead them to more clues. Unfortunately though, after a whole day of looking, the group turn up with nothing. Following the last trail of residuals to another dead end, Yuki wonders if the trail has gone cold, but like clockwork, suddenly the entire area around them darkens and transforms, revealing the exact same curse spirit from the abandoned building yesterday, prompting everyone to be even more confused, especially since Saki and Nobara made sure to double check their work after the first fake out death. Once again though, the students find themselves lured right into a trap, as chasing the curse gets them transported right into an innate domain. Similar to the juvenile detention center when the Tokyo trio encountered the finger bearer, all 5 students are lost in the depths of some mysterious curse's pocket dimension. With no other choice, knowing they've been had, the group venture further into the innate domain in hopes of locating an exit. Making their way deeper into the territory, they randomly stumble upon the group of girls from Kyoto, who for some reason have also ended up stuck inside this curse spirit's trap. The Kyoto students explain they were hot on the trail of a suspected curse, when all of a sudden the environment changed shape. Everyone is confused how they could possibly end up in the same domain if they were chasing different curses, prompting Mai and Momo to start an argument over Tokyo trying to steal the credit of their exorcism. But in that moment, 2 completely identical curses make themselves known. The same dollar store kid boos from earlier, immediately proving that everyone was telling the truth. At that same time though, a hole opens up beneath Yuji and Kaito Yuki, transporting the two of them to a different location of the domain, leaving the 4 girls to fend for themselves against a growing horde of curses. Elsewhere in the domain, Yuji comes to and calls out for Yuki, who is also okay thankfully. As the two start to get surrounded by more of the identical curses as before, both Yuji and Yuki realize they're dealing with much more intelligent enemies than they first thought. They do their best to battle the seemingly endless stream of curses, but because Yuki is exhausted and only able to play support, Yuji finds himself spending more time defending the Fukuoka student than fighting back. Yuki apologizes for being a burden, admitting it's extremely embarrassing that he needs to be rescued by the person he spent the last week dehumanizing, making Yuki question why he even became a Jujutsu sorcerer in the first place. He can't even follow Jujutsu law, let alone fight against curses. But as Yuki watches Itadori continue to fearlessly stand against the enemy, Yuki begins to find his resolve. And as a group of curses slip past Yuji, Yuki instantly remembers the lesson that Yuji taught him earlier, admitting to himself that even though it came from Yuji, hearing Itadori tell Yuki that he was a full-fledged sorcerer made Yuki happy, declaring to the world that he is a Jujutsu sorcerer, using the training he received from Yuji to overcome the curses and exorcise them himself. Without wasting any time, Yuki tells Yuji that he's sorry for not having any time to explain, but he needs Yuji to accept his curse. And much to Yuki's surprise, despite the awful way Yuki treated him, without hesitation, Yuji says he will, placing an obscene amount of trust in Yuki that he probably doesn't deserve. And then Yuki activates his ability, Curse Technique Boost, Night Hunt, a curse barrier that Yuki casts on his allies that significantly buff their cursed energy output, in exchange for a binding vow that forces the ally into combat against an enemy of Yuki's choosing, rejuvenating Yuji of his stamina and boosting every stat. While Kaito Yuki is able to hold off the minions, Yuji's able to completely decimate the main curse spirit on his own. And as Yuki watches Itadori soar, war, he finally begins to acknowledge Yuji for who he is, realizing that whatever Yuji's been through, it must have been extremely worse than anything Yuki's endured. Yuki's ashamed to admit that if Yuji wasn't present, he probably would have died in this domain. But Yuji tries to cheer Yuki up, telling him that he wouldn't have been able to beat the main boss either if Yuki didn't support him. As they set off to find their friends, Yuki clarifies that he will still never be able to accept Sukuna's vessel as a friend. However, when it comes to Itadori Yuji, the Jujutsu sorcerer, Yuki has no choice but to recognize him as an ally, something that makes Yuji smile. Meanwhile, the five girls are having a tough time cooperating in their group battle, as despite everyone's efforts, they still haven't accomplished anything and are too busy bickering to finish off their foes. Itadori and Kaito Yuki show up in the middle of all of this, offering to join the battle and help, but their interruption immediately disrupts the girls' hostility. The girls all turn their anger on the boys, and Nobara wonders aloud why in the hell they should let the guys take all of the credit, admitting that would be worse than losing to Kyoto, while Mai, surprisingly, says she's never agreed with Nobara more. And in no time at all, once the girls are all able to cooperate effectively, the cursed spirits stand no chance, all of them creating the perfect chemical reaction that ends up with them exercising the last boss in one big ultimate team attack, making Yuji ask if that's really all it took for the girls to do their jobs. As the domain's barrier shatters and no curses remain, both Tokyo and Kyoto disperse, going their separate ways after ending up in another argument directly after they eliminated the threat. Nobara and Rindo declare they're tired and stomp off, leaving Yuji and Yuki to run off trying to catch up with them, while the Kyoto girls head back to report the situation to their principal. Once everyone's left though, the mysterious curse spirit from before shows themselves, clearly watching the scene unfold from the background once again. The curse mentions, albeit cryptically, that after being able to observe all of the talent available, no sorcerers in either Tokyo or Kyoto interest him. That is, except for one, as the camera cuts to show Megami, who was on his own investigation, just finishing off the exorcism of, surprise surprise, the exact same identical curse as everyone else did. With the mastermind revealed, to us at least, the mysterious curse laughs to itself, claiming that it can't wait to have Megami's power all to itself. The next day, everyone is finally able to reconvene after their experiences. Yuji, Nobara, and Megami put their heads together to try and understand exactly what could be going on, considering it's way too strange to be a coincidence that 4 identical curses would exist separate from one another. Megami hypothesizes there must be someone deliberately creating curses and spreading them around Kyushu, and Nobara wonders if that's even possible, but Megami admits what other explanation could there be. At the same time, Ichichi arrives and announces an emergency. Apparently, while investigating in Oita, Principal Nagino encountered and was severely injured by a special grade curse. With Nagino in a coma and his condition unstable, everyone heads to Oita in order to check on his status. And since no one was with Nagino when the attack happened, it's impossible to find out anything about what happened or even ask questions, leaving everyone entirely in the dark of what to do next. However, in a blind rage, Rindo yells that none of that matters and she'll just keep beating up curses in Oita until she comes across a special grade, rushing off with no real direction, making Nobara follow her, despite Ichichi trying to stop them. With no reinforcements available, Yuji and Megami decide that it's up to them to discover who attacked Nagino. Kaito Yuki is in disbelief that 2 mere students would be thinking about confronting a special grade, but Yuji admits they're still Jujutsu sorcerers, high school students or not. Ichichi knows that he can't force them to stay here, asking that at the very least, if they do find the special grade, to wait for a plan before charging into battle. As the 3 of them return to the location that Nagino was supposedly attacked at, Yuji and Megami think it's weird there's no signs of a struggle. With the only thing they can do be follow the residuals, Megami splits up from Yuji and Yuki so the 2 groups can cover more ground. Sometime later, neither Yuji and Yuki or Megami have found anything of note in their search, feeling like the trail of residuals is just leading them further and further away from each other. Deciding to call it a day, just like what happened before, Megami is immediately surrounded by a dark aura, finding himself transported to the innate domain from the other day. The phone line cuts out, and Yuji instantly picks up that Fushiguro encountered danger, him and Yuki making their way full speed back to Fushiguro's location. Meanwhile, genuinely feeling relieved that the evidence came to him instead of the other way around, Megami's just glad he doesn't have to call this a wasted day, preparing for battle as he gets surrounded by curses. Realizing he's now looking at countless replicas of the same Kid Buu curse spirit, wondering if there's any actual end to them. when suddenly all of the minion curses begin to kneel, revealing a larger, more developed curse that seemingly is the leader of the pack. The leader motions to Megumi, calling him out by first and last name, which surprises the sorcerer, wondering if this is the special grade that attacked Nagino. As all of the minions descend onto Megumi, the curse asks Megumi to show him his true power. No matter how many times Megumi is about to be killed by the minions though, they seem to pull away just before making the finishing blow, prompting Megumi to wonder if all of this is just one big test for the leader to observe his skills. Just then, Itadori and Yuki break through the crowd of minions, distracting the group long enough for Fushiguro to focus on the leader of the pack. As the two of them fight towards Megumi's side, Fushiguro decides to stop holding back, releasing Nue's thunder waves to shock and stun the curse leader. And as they finally gain the upper hand, Megumi begins to feel uneasy, as if all of this is going too well, but decides to push past that, attempting to escape with Yuji and Yuki. But before he can, two words echo throughout the entire territory.
Domain expansion.
Engulfed in a second domain of pure red, Megumi finds himself face to face with a mysterious curse that has been watching everything from afar. The curse laughs, welcoming Megumi into his domain. Meanwhile, as Yuji plans to break the domain open from the outside, the leader curse from before gets in his way, referring to the mysterious curse as its master, telling Yuji even if he could break the domain, it would never let him do that. Realizing that this is definitely the special grade they were looking for, not the curse from earlier, Megumi instantly braces himself for whatever this domain's guaranteed hit might be. The curse tries to tell Megumi there's no need to be on guard, since he's not trying to kill Megumi, but Fushiguro claims he'll never trust a curse spirit. The mastermind admits that none of that really matters anyway, because its innate technique has already taken effect moments ago, making Megumi confused, but suddenly he realizes his palm has begun bleeding, being struck with an extreme feeling of fatigue and falling to his knees. The sorcerer claiming he can feel his power literally being sapped away from him. The curse thanks Megumi for delivering him this long-desired treasure, and the domain expansion instantly disperses. Yuji slides in to grab Megumi and succeeds in putting some distance between the two parties, but when he asks Megumi if he's okay, Fushiguro says he literally doesn't know, as he has no idea what's actually been done to him. From the other side of the domain, the mastermind tells them both not to worry, as all of this will be made clear very soon. The curse, previously thought to be the leader of the pack, kneels before the mastermind, calling this mysterious curse Lord Rosetsu, as Rosetsu, revealing samples of both Megumi's blood and cursed energy, takes samples and imbues them directly into the curse's body. Within no time at all, the curse becomes consumed in a jet black surge of energy, corrupting its form into a more pronounced and unique shape, colored black and white to define its strength compared to the minions. And as the vessel rises, almost as if it was baptized, it thanks its master for its new power, never expecting the cursed energy would be such a great match. And as Rosetsu admits he's also impressed, he asks the curse to test out its new abilities on the students, surprising everyone as the vessel claps its hands and summons forth an exact replica of the divine dog totality Shikigami. As the sorcerers try to stand against the curse, it shows that it also has the power to summon Nue, the Thunderbird, crashing into Yuji and shocking him heavily with its electricity. Yuji curses at Rosetsu, demanding to know how it's fighting with Megumi's techniques, and Rosetsu happily responds in order to gain an additional buff for explaining his powers. Once Rosetsu witnesses a cursed technique, by stealing the user's blood and cursed energy, and fulfilling these three conditions in no specific order, Rosetsu is able to create an exact replica of that person's technique. And by creating an empty vessel meant to hold all of that energy, Rosetsu can give birth to fully fledged beings capable of using those powers themselves. Rosetsu calls this ability Curse Technique Snatch. Very original, and he believes by stealing sorcerers' techniques and using them as his own, Rosetsu will be able to craft the ultimate work of art that surpasses all existence. Meanwhile, from within Yuji, a familiar dark aura stirs. From within Yuji's soul, Ryomen Sukuna is watching from his throne in disgust, calling this cursed spirit's methods boring. As the Ten Shadows curse overwhelms the three students, Megumi discovers he's now completely useless in battle due to not properly being able to gather his cursed energy. Meanwhile, amongst the chaos, Kaito Yuki is heavily injured by the cursed spirit's Nue, resulting in a situation where both Yuki and Megumi are incapacitated, leaving Yuji the only one left who can fight. Finally alone, Rosetsu wishes to take this opportunity to talk to Yuji about something, but Itadori refuses to listen, vowing to exorcise Rosetsu, even if it costs Yuji his life. This amuses Rosetsu, but the two are interrupted by a loud scream as Rindo and Nobara have finally entered the domain, managing to track the group down. Rindo demands to know if Rosetsu is the special grade responsible for injuring Nagino, and the sound of that name makes Rosetsu laugh uncontrollably, acting as if he was struggling to remember who it was at first, but then cutting the act, Rosetsu outright telling Rindo that Nagino is a boring sorcerer, a man so empty and so dull that he practically has nothing left worth to steal. No different from the Walking Dead itself. Hearing this sends Rindo into a blind rage, who charges at Rosetsu and leaves herself wide open, Rosetsu taking the advantage and one-shotting the Fukuoka student as quickly as she showed up, making Yuji realize that the two girls appearing has only made the situation worse, and if they don't find a way out soon, it's going to end up with all of them dead. At first, Rosetsu seems more than happy to exterminate some of the undesirables, but before the battle continues, something interrupts him, scoffing as he remarks he thought he had a little more time, claiming he'll have to end the show early today. And without any indication or warning, Rosetsu and the innate domain instantly disappear, leaving all of the students exactly where they were before being captured, with not a single curse or residual left in sight. Everyone is rightfully confused, and Yuji wonders if they were able to find a way to escape, but Megumi corrects Yuji, telling him they were simply let go. Everyone wants to head back and report what happened, however, Rindo is acting exceptionally defeated, feeling ashamed that she was looked down upon by the person who injured her mentor. Yuji says they need to head home while it's still safe, but Rindo lashes out, asking how all of them can just give up after being disrespected like that. Yuji admits they really don't have much of a choice with how hurt everyone is, but Rindo claims she's going to chase after Rosetsu alone. Before Yuji even has the chance to argue, Nobara interrupts and tells Rindo just to do what she wants. Standing on the same business she did from before, Nobara is more than willing to let Rindo throw her life away if she thinks that's what's right. But Nobara correctly calls Rindo out by mentioning that her hands are trembling, and if Rindo really meant what she said, she would have just gone ahead and done it instead of trying to talk big and staying here, putting Rindo in her place and getting her to shut up long enough for the group to return back to Oita. When they do get back, they discover that Principal Yaga has arrived himself to assist in the operation, the situation growing dire enough for him to be forced to leave Gojo in charge of Tokyo while he's gone. As the group get Yaga up to speed with their report, the mention of the name Rosetsu instantly catches Yaga's attention, and the principal asks the students if they were sure that's what the curse's name was. Realizing that this has grown into quite the crisis, Principal Yaga reveals he's actually quite familiar with the curse spirit known as Rosetsu. Yaga is just surprised that it would return after all of this time. Asking what the principal means by this, Yaga tells the students that Rosetsu is actually a special grade curse that was supposed to have been exorcised over 20 years ago by both Yaga and Nagino personally. With everyone in shock, Yaga takes this time to explain what he does know about Rosetsu's ability, Curse Technique Snatch, clarifying that Fushiguro's powers haven't necessarily been stolen, merely replicated at an almost 100% accuracy rate. Megumi can technically still use his abilities, however his cursed energy reserves are severely low due to acting similarly to a remote battery that is portably being drained by the vessel from afar. Megumi will remain in a constant state of weakness until Rosetsu either dispels the technique or they're able to defeat the vessel that holds all of Megumi's power. This puts the protagonist at a major disadvantage due to losing a key member of their combat force. Although Yaga says this could be turned into a benefit, as while Megumi and the cursed vessel remain connected, Fushiguro should be able to sense where it is at all times, giving the sorcerers a chance to prepare and plan an all-out operation on Rosetsu, instead of constantly being split up and taken advantage of like they have been. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Kaito Yuki visits his comatose mentor, coming to terms with how weak he is in the face of a special grade curse. Despite his previous spark of motivation, Yuki admits the encounter with Rosetsu has left him terrified, scared that the next time they meet, it will mean the death of both him and and Nagino. But as Yuki pours out his fears, Rindo reveals that she's been listening to every word, making Yuki angry that she would eavesdrop on him like that. Rindo tells Yuki that if he's so scared, he should just quit, as even though she can't say there won't come a time where she'll lose or be afraid, she's never going to let that stand in the way of her being herself. Something that, again, makes Yuki think of Itadori Yuji, and how despite having every reason to give up, Yuji still continues to fight. So Yuki once again finds resolve through lessons that Yuji has taught him, changing his mind and telling Rindo that he's not going to give up either, because that's not what Jujutsu sorcerers do. Rindo agrees, and they both promise to end the battle with Rosetsu before their principal wakes up, ensuring all the problems in Kyushu are handled so he doesn't have to worry. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, Fushiguro is struggling to push himself and wants to join the operation against Rosetsu. Everyone is rightfully worried, but Megumi's not wrong in admitting that waiting around and resting isn't going to get him any better either. And surprisingly, a couple of familiar voices agree with him, as the Tokyo second years, Maki Zenin, Toge Inumaki, and Panda all enter the scene, revealing that they too have been requested to join the operation against Rosetsu, opting to help train Megumi and get him used to his new physical condition. Also back from the infirmary, Kato Yuki asks if he can join in on Maki's training, recognizing her as a cursed weapons expert and wanting the opportunity to learn directly under someone as strong as her, something that makes Maki excited, as she's more than happy to smack more willing first years into shape. Exhausted after their training session, Itadori makes the suggestion to Yuki and Megumi to head towards the hot spring and rejuvenate their stamina. Megumi and Yuki both agree to meet Yuji there after their report to Principal Yaga, as Yuji heads up to the mountain alone, thinking he'll have a spacious hot spring all to himself. However, upon entering the springs, Yuji discovers none other than his brother, Aoi Todo, already in attendance and waiting for Yuji to arrive, declaring that it has been a long time since he and Yuji have met, but that it's been an even longer time since they've been naked together. Yuji loudly announcing to anyone listening that they have literally never once been naked together. The conversation, if you can even call it that, gets derailed though, when suddenly Todo senses an enemy cursed energy nearby, telling his brother there's no time to catch up and they must spring into action. Todo sprints right into the forest with only a towel on, demanding Yuji follow, and while Itadori does indeed chase after Todo, he's screaming the entire time if they can at least stop to put clothes on before they go. By the time Yuji does catch up to Todo though, there isn't any time to mince words, as they discover the cursed energy was coming from one of Rosetsu's cursed minions. Unsure how it was able to get so close to the hot spring without setting off any alarms, Todo assumes the curse sacrificed its strength for better cursed energy concealment, as when the two sorcerers do catch and exorcise the minion, Yuji admits it was nothing like the previous ones he fought. However, the actual question was what was one of Rosetsu's minions doing stalking around the hot springs in the first place? The two sorcerers return to headquarters and report the attack, and while Yaga is grateful the students are safe, the principal is a little off-put with the fact Yuji neglected to wear clothes on official Jujutsu business. Obviously, Yuji is beyond embarrassed and tries to explain himself by saying that everything happened so fast there really wasn't any time to do so. From the sidelines, Todo joins Yaga in the criticism, claiming that as a sorcerer, Yuji should always be paying attention to the time and place. Itadori proceeds to also point out that Todo is naked as well. However, when Yuji turns around, he discovers Todo is somehow fully clothed. The grade 1 sorcerer literally gaslighting Yuji into acting like he wasn't the one that convinced Yuji to run into the night butt naked in the first place. Yaga asks if they can just move on, and Itadori shifts the conversation to if Todo is here to help in the operation. And originally, Todo wasn't going to help, actually only being in the same location as everyone due to a live concert of his favorite pop idol Takada being in the area. Todo was only able to get a ticket last minute, so he decided to abuse Japanese tax dollars by using Jujutsu headquarters as a place to stay. However, now seeing that his brother is in need of assistance, Todo is more than willing to join the operation against Rosetsu, as long as it doesn't conflict with the concert, of course. And finally, after taking multiple days to prepare, the Jujutsu students of Tokyo, Kyoto, and Fukuoka High all assemble at the bottom of a large mountain in Kyushu, the exact location Fushiguro tracked the cursed vessel he's connected to down. However, the entire landscape is polluted with cursed energy, and knowing Rosetsu, the place is probably infested with curses. Meaning, despite the plan originally being to stick together as one large fighting force, they might just have to play right into Rosetsu's hands and split up if they're to have any hope of actually finding him. With this knowledge, Yaga directs Megumi to form a team and search for the 10 Shadows curse specifically, claiming that if they can weaken Rosetsu's forces, they can make the operation easier for everyone. Meanwhile, everyone everyone else forms into teams specifically around people in their group that are optimal against Rosetsu. Those people being Miwa, Maki, Yuji, and Panda, the 4 students without an actual curse technique capable of being stolen. Sending the teams on their separate ways, Yaga explains that no group is to engage Rosetsu directly without first reaching out to Yaga and allowing him to confirm the special grade's identity. Once he does, Yaga says he'll be the one to personally exorcise Rosetsu. At the same time, deeper on in the mountain range, Rosetsu is happy to see that all of the sorcerers are in attendance, just as he predicted. However, it would seem this time Rosetsu is actually speaking with someone, asking if this person will be sticking around to watch all the fun. This person claims they can't be seen by anyone at Jujutsu High though, so they'll be taking their leave, revealing that the person Rosetsu is conspiring with to be Suguru Geto, or as we learn after the Shibuya incident, Noritoshi Kamo. But to make things easier, since it's not really a spoiler, we'll just call him Kenjaku. Rosetsu thanks Kenjaku for lending him something, telling the fake Geto that he'll be sure to make good use of it. He tells Geto he had better leave now if he doesn't want anyone to see, and the two go their separate ways. While he makes his exit, Kenjaku chuckles to himself, curious to see how tall a curse spirit that rules over a whole countryside can grow when given all the right nutrients and resources it needs to succeed. Everyone is forced to split into teams against their will, spawning unlikely pairings like the Zenin sisters, Momo, Inumaki, and Momo Nishimiya, as well as the all-girls team Saki Rindo, Nobura Kugasaki, and Miwa Kasumi. However, despite their high level of reconnaissance, even after an entire hour of searching, not a single team has encountered hide nor hair of Rosetsu. Megumi suggests that his team and Miwa's meet up to confront the Ten Shadows vessel, sensing its presence closer to them. Meanwhile, Momo will go off to help the other teams locate Rosetsu, as she can cover way more ground with her flight. Deeper on into the mountain range, Aoi Todo, the only sorcerer that was deemed strong enough to investigate on his own, races at breakneck speeds across the terrain, exercising curses the entire way through. Not having much luck compared to the other students though, Todo decides to stop his rampage and answer the ringing phone in his pocket. It's Momo, who attempts to guide Todo towards Megumi and Miwa's teams as they converge on the Ten Shadows vessel, but Todo vehemently refuses, saying that the vessel probably isn't even special grade, and if the others are worth anything, they won't need his help exercising it. Speaking of which, Todo needs to hang up now anyway, since he actually just hit the jackpot now. And as the line disconnects, Momo is shocked to think what her classmate most likely means by those words. The main target, Rosetsu, laughs, claiming he's flattered Todo would consider him such a catch, revealing that the grade 1 did in fact encounter Rosetsu. But the curse frowns, claiming that for him, finding Todo is more like a big miss, attempting to summon forth a horde of minions to escape, but Todo tears his shirt right off, promising that he'll make Rosetsu regret underestimating him. Catching back up with Momo, the closest team to her location was Yuji, Panda, and Yuki, who she immediately informs Todo made contact with the target. Realizing that they're directly between both Todo's location and Principal Yaga's, Itadori opts to head towards Todo first, while everyone else tries to notify the principal. Yuki is hesitant, but Panda's more than aware of the bond Yuji and Todo share, admitting there isn't really anyone that'd be able to reach Todo faster anyway, and Momo acts as Yuji's guide as the two race back towards the battle coordinates. But Todo and Rosetsu have already been scrapping for a few minutes now, and the special grade is growing agitated with the sorcerer, who he calls a pest. But Todo laughs, asking if he's such a pest, why can't Rosetsu get rid of him? Deducing that Rosetsu is most likely after something specific on the mountain, and Rosetsu basically admits as much, saying he'd like to conserve energy for later, and if he exposes a weakness this early, it could ruin the grand finale. Rosetsu tries increasing the number of minions in his horde, but Todo is done playing games, declaring he's got no other choice but to force Rosetsu to get serious. And waiting for just the right moment for the curse to let his guard down, Todo unveils his boogie woogie technique, swapping places with Rosetsu's minions and landing multiple critical blows, coming to the conclusion that compared to a disaster curse like Hanami, Rosetsu is nowhere near as powerful. Despite sustaining heavy damage though, Rosetsu begins to smile and laugh, thinking to himself it was such a blunder not to realize such a strong technique was hiding amidst the students. As the grade 1 continues his handicapped assault on the curse, Rosetsu loudly declares the boogie woogie technique must be his, right as Todo lands his his finishing blow, scattering Rosetsu's cursed energy to pieces, his essence disappearing into nothing. Todo lets out a sigh of relief after finally exorcising his prey. Or so he thinks, as suddenly a woman's voice calls out to Todo, wondering aloud if a special grade like Rosetsu would truly go down so easily. Time stops, and Todo is pulled into the world of his own inner mental machinations, face to face with the idol Takeda, who asks, despite Todo watching Rosetsu disappear with his own two eyes, isn't dying at such a dramatic moment of the fight exactly what a curse would want Todo to think? And in less than 0.0001 seconds of time passing, Todo realizes in a minuscule of a moment he's been bamboozled. Thinking back to that highly skilled cursed minion he and Yuji ran into at the hot springs, with cursed energy concealment like that, a curse could easily fake its death. And as time resumes, Todo jumps out of the way just before Rosetsu lands his counterattack. Todo apologizes to the curse, admitting that even though Rosetsu's on the weaker side, an enemy that can pull off a trick like that shouldn't be underestimated. But even before Todo can finish, Rosetsu tells him nothing the sorcerer says matters anymore, as much to Todo's shock, a deep, impactful fatigue falls over him. Rosetsu has already fulfilled the conditions necessary for Curse Technique Snatch, retrieving a sample of Todo's blood just earlier. And as the exhaustion keeps Todo incapacitated, an empty vessel emerges from the forest behind, ready to accept its master's new gift. But first we cut to Megumi and Inumaki, who have also begun their encounter with the Ten Shadows vessel. Yet no matter what they do, it just seems like the vessel is leading them on a wild goose chase. But once the trio of Miwa, Rindo, and Nobara arrive, the Shadow Vessel decides it's finally time to stop messing around. Having been tasked with delaying Jujutsu High's efforts and separating as many undesirable sorcerers as possible from the main stage, now that there are more than enough subjects present in one place, the vessel is free to trim the fat. The sorcerer that Rosetsu really wants is not amongst this group, and the vessel calls forth its Nue as the students prepare for battle. But we're cutting back to Todo and Rosetsu, as the curse is more than proud of his side quest, admitting he never expected to steal such a valuable technique. Confidently, Todo declares it doesn't matter if Rosetsu steals Boogie Woogie, as there could never be a better user of the ability than him. But like clockwork, the storm of cursed energy disperses and reveals a fully transformed curse vessel, a red, six-armed beast. And in one look, Todo instantly realizes what Rosetsu meant when he said he was trying to prove the superiority of curses, knowing all too well how 3 sets of arms can change Boogie Woogie's potential. In no time at all, Todo finds himself completely overwhelmed against the Boogie Woogie vessel. Knowing full well how troublesome his curse technique can be firsthand, Todo wonders if this is his toughest challenge yet. But just as all seems lost, a voice calls out to Todo, and as if fate itself was pulling the strings, Todo can't help but laugh to himself as Itadori Yuji barrels out of the forest, landing right next to his brother's side and asking if he's okay. Todo admits he is now, happy to know that even in his darkest moments, his brother will always be there. Yuji's surprised to see Rosetsu's new vessel and asks if Todo can still fight after his technique was stolen, but whether it's because Rosetsu had a smaller sample size or just because Todo is playing tougher than Megumi, he's more than ready to keep carrying on, declaring some fake would never compare to the original, and knowing that as long as the two of them are together, they'll conquer any foe as the best friends charge into battle. Back with Panda and Yuki, the two are being constantly delayed by the endless hordes of Rosetsu's cursed minions. And once again, they're faced with no choice but to split up to reach their destinations faster. Surprisingly though, it's Yuki who suggests this decision, and when Panda seems hesitant, the Fukuoka student jumps in front of the cursed corpse and exercises a minion all on his own, telling Panda that the priority should be getting as many people to attack Rosetsu as possible. Panda thinks Yuki shouldn't try so hard, since he can easily see that Yuki's shaking from over here, but he agrees and decides it'll be okay to trust Yuki from here on out. And all by himself, Yuki takes down the entire crowd of curse minions, using Itadori's fighting style as a reference to increase his skills. Yuki doesn't want to get too full of himself though, so he decides to go meet back up with Panda and Yaga. But right before Yuki heads off, a familiar voice calls out to him, and shocked, Yuki turns around to see his own principal, Nagino, standing right behind him, fully recovered from his injuries. Too happy to really question the sudden appearance, Yuki's elated to see his mentor, excited that they'll be able to meet up with Yaga and take down Rosetsu together. But Nagino laughs, claiming that he actually already passed Yaga on his way here, and their plan was to have Nagino and Yuki head in first while Yaga collects everyone else. Yuki is a bit weirded out by this, but Nagino reassures his student, telling him that now that he's here, Yuki shouldn't be such a worrier, urging the student to follow him as they head deeper into the mountain. Meanwhile, Todo and Yuji are still in the heat of their battle against the Boogie Woogie vessel, and even with the added help, the two sorcerers are being completely overcome by the 6 armed curses repeat swaps. That is, until Yuji and Todo end up beside each other once again and acknowledge they've finally started to get the hang of the vessel's rhythm. And with the brothers' synchronization reaching perfect equilibrium, they're able to differentiate between the unique sounds of both Todo and the curse's claps, using that as a way to adjust Todo swap to occur just after the vessels, creating an immediate Uno reverse and allowing the brothers to adapt, landing critical counters. Exploiting the various scattered cursed minions surrounding the Boogie Woogie vessel, Yuji and Todo open it up for the perfect knockout blow, exercising the vessel and returning Todo's stolen energy to its proper owner. As it dissipates, Todo tells the vessel that despite its arm advantage, it never would have been able to overcome the infinite odds he and his brother can create in battle. However, despite that synergy, because the vessel dragged both of them so far away from everyone else, Rosetsu can't be sensed anymore, and regretfully, the brothers have to split up for now. And on the other side of the mountain, the other students are just as hopelessly distracted in their battle with the 10 Shadows vessel. No matter how hard they all try, because the vessel is able to conjure multiple Nue at once, they're just trapped in a stalemate with no real way to reach the vessel's main body. However, just as the vessel starts to get comfortable going in for the final kills, a loose bullet rings right past it, followed by a slash that almost cuts the vessel in half, making the curse jump back and revealing that Mai and Maki Zenin have reached the teams, joining the fray and disrupting the flow of battle, giving everyone the opening they needed to launch their counterattack. Yet, despite these turning tides, everyone was missing the major point of this entire operation, something that becomes exceedingly apparent as Yuji, Yaga, and Panda all come across each other on their paths towards Rosetsu, realizing that somehow they were all able to meet up with each other before Yuki did. Wanting to call Yuki and ensure his safety, Yuji does reach him, but the line is too broken up and fuzzy to hear, only being able to make out that Yuki is with someone and that they're right on Rosetsu's tail. They do not realize the danger that Yuki is in though, so the three of them just simply decide to continue their search and find Yuki on the way. On the other side of the phone call, as the line gets cut due to the oppressive and dense cursed energy fogging up the area, Yuki becomes extremely on edge. But Nagino admits it's most likely just because Rosetsu is near. And speak of the devil, right on cue, the special grade walks into frame, having finally escaped the annoyance of Todo and Yuji. Yuki tries to grab onto Nagino and back away, but weirdly enough, the two characters begin chatting with each other as if they were old friends, confusing Yuki as Nagino laughs off the fact that Rosetsu almost basically killed him back in Oita. And surprisingly, Rosetsu shares in the humor, admitting that he may have overdone it, but Nagino should know Rosetsu can't actually kill him as long as their binding vow remains intact. As the tension in the situation begins to focus itself on Yuki, the two pals move their attention over to the student who's cowering in the corner. Rosetsu admits that while he's happy Nagino would be so kind to gift him the sorcerer he needed, he can't exactly take a present home that isn't willing to cooperate. The Fukuoka principal looks the other way and lets out a hesitant sigh before he agrees with the curse, and Rosetsu tells Nagino that he'll leave the dirty work to him. Yuki once again asks to know what's going on, But after apologizing to his student, Nagino chucks a hefty punch right into Yuki's abdomen, incapacitating the teenager and knocking him to the floor. Falling over and begging his mentor to explain what's going on, all Yuki receives are more kicks to the gut. Nagino chastising his student for not properly defending himself with cursed energy like he taught him all those years ago. Just before Yuki passes out from the pain though, Nagino is interrupted by a screaming Yaga, demanding to know what Nagino thinks he's doing, arriving on the scene with Panda and Yuji, as Rosetsu smiles wide from the shadows, unable to believe the coincidence that all of the pieces to his puzzle would come together on their own. Everyone rightfully questions Nagino and Rosetsu on their actions, and Rosetsu seems way too happy to reveal that Nagino has been an informant on his side from the very beginning, essentially acting as Rosetsu's man on the inside to keep the curse up to date on Jujutsu Society and sorcerer trends, while in hiding. Yuji asks how Nagino could be stupid enough to work alongside a curse, but all Nagino can say for now is that it's necessary. And in that moment, Rosetsu makes a lunge for Yuji, while Nagino ignites his own cursed energy, attempting to block Yaga from interfering, asking his old friend just how long it's been since the two of them fought properly. Unable to make any sense of what's happening, as Rosetsu summons forth a miasma of cursed energy and minions, Itadori thinks he has no choice but to accept the cursed spirit's challenge, attempting to take Rosetsu down here and now. During the battle though, Yuji is easily able to tell Rosetsu isn't in top form, making the special grade extremely annoyed that he had to waste so much stamina on Todo before getting to this main event. Ironically enough, both fighters come to the conclusion it's now or never and launch their best strategies at the same time. And although Yuji's able to knock Rosetsu off balance with a critical strike, at the same time, the curse makes a small gash on the sorcerer, fulfilling the last condition needed for curse technique snatch. But believing himself to not be a threat of the ability, Itadori continues his assault at full force. However, Rosetsu backs away and opts to take the time to explain and divulge his curse technique one more time to Yuji, admitting usually against an average, no technique having sorcerer like Yuji, curse technique snatch would be useless. However, Yuji isn't just your average sorcerer. And at first, Itadori doesn't get what Rosetsu means by that. The curse just ignores him and thanks Yuji instead. No, thanks Sukuna's vessel for being born in this era and also being careless enough to not realize his value as a snatch target. Suddenly, a vessel appears right before Rosetsu, as the curse continues to explain that when there's no technique involved, the vessel will merely gain the physical properties of the snatch target and nothing more. And when Yuji still hasn't pieced everything together, Rosetsu decides he'll outright show him what he means, revealing the special gift that he was given by Kenjaku, 2 Sukuna fingers. Now that everything begins to make sense, Rosetsu fuses Itadori's blood, energy, and the Sukuna fingers into the empty vessel's body, creating a mirror parallel to Yuji and Sukuna's soul-body connection. And instead of merely boosting the vessel's power like a finger bearer curse, the concoction imbues it fully with the King of Curses' essence, giving birth to a curse spirit that is actually able to harness the power of Ryomen Sukuna. Out of nowhere, colossal invisible slashes rain down on the earth, ripping Yuji back into the air, as an all-too-familiar demonic laugh resonates from Rosetsu's newest creation, emerging like a mirror replica of the King of Curses himself. And somewhere, deep within Yuji, a scoff rings out. The actual Sukuna, watching everything unfold from within, finds himself disgusted at what he sees, claiming that both curse and sorcerer are downright unforgivable for this. At the same time, Mahito and Kenjaku are also enjoying the show from afar. Mahito's surprised to even see that Rosetsu was successful, admitting he actually really didn't believe Rosetsu was worth the risk, prompting Kenjaku to reveal that this is only the beginning and that Rosetsu will soon show them what they're truly waiting for: the Kyushu Grand Barrier, a new world order where curses will reside over humans and enslave them in hopes of harvesting the ultimate curse technique, an idea that immediately brings an intrigued smirk to Mahito's face. As the Ten Shadows vessel begins to realize it may have bit off a bit more than it could chew with Maki and Mai added to the rotation, just before anything major can actually occur, a massive fluctuation of sinister aura erupts across the mountain, triggering both the curse and Megami to realize that Sukuna's power has been released. Seeing this as his ticket out, the vessel's picked up and carried away by one of its Nues, as minions crowd up in one spot to keep the students from following. And with the knowledge that Sukuna's energy has awoken, Megami attempts to stop everyone from giving chase. As despite Mai believing this might be their only chance to stop the shadow vessel, Megami seems to be the only one understanding the danger that's become involved now. Megami assumes that Yuji has actually fallen under Sukuna's possession, and although he's wrong, he does declare himself the only one to go. As per the promise he and Itadori made, this is Megami's responsibility alone. However, Nobara insists she come too, saying that unlike last time, she wants to be there to knock some sense back into Yuji. But Yuji's barely holding on as it is after enduring that colossal attack he just got hit with, as Rosetsu is high on his own success, admitting he's even relieved the ritual worked, as this was honestly Rosetsu's biggest gamble of all. Try as he might, Yuji begins to fade in and out of consciousness as the fatigue of curse technique snatch drains him of fighting spirit. In a surprising turn of events though, Kaito Yuki appears to help. He's in just as rough shape as Yuji though. Seeing this makes Rosetsu laugh, asking what such a weak sorcerer would be able to accomplish in a state like that, prompting Yuki to summon the last of his might in desperation, refusing to let Rosetsu hurt Yuji, casting forth a supremely powerful barrier around Yuji that even Rosetsu is able to recognize should be far too strong for Yuki to handle. Realizing the only way Yuki could have done this was a binding vow, one that Yuki admits he staked his life on to keep Yuji safe. Yuki has no idea what Rosetsu needs him for, but he knows the curse wants Yuki alive, conditioning the barrier on the promise that if it breaks, Yuki's life will cease. And in an admitted moment of weakness, Rosetsu finds himself at the crossroads of fate. While he instinctively wants to call Yuki's bluff, believing that due to the circumstances of the binding vow, Yuki technically is winning out on both instances, making the death vow impossible to forge as it lacks equivalent exchange. But at the same time, Rosetsu knows there are no absolutes in Jujutsu. Believing that, for now, it's probably best to just quit while he's ahead, Rosetsu chooses to not test that overwhelmingly great luck he's had, knocking Yuki unconscious and leaving Yuji powerless and alone in his wake. The next time Yuji's eyes open, he's back at the headquarters in Oita, waking up just in time to overhear Rindo lashing out at Principal Yaga after he breaks the news to her that Nagino betrayed them. Understandably, Rindo thinks what was essentially her adopted father being evil enough to exploit them all as pawns is just some sick joke. But sadly, Panda isn't keen enough on manners to hold back and confirms the horrible truth, admitting he even watched Nagino and Yaga fight with his own eyes. As Yuji makes his way into the room, Rindo storms off, brushing past Yuji as she stomps away and punches a wall, beginning to tear up. Deciding to leave Rindo alone for now, everyone regains composure, and Yaga starts to believe that the entire mountain operation was just one big setup. Todo asks what could Rosetsu even want with a, no offense, weak sorcerer like Yuki, and Yuji admits while he doesn't really have an idea, all he can say is that Yuki's curse technique really came in handy the last time they fought. But once Yuji reveals the method and name of the technique, a gasp breaks the nonchalant conversation. It's Principal Yaga asking Yuji if what he's telling everyone is really the truth. And on confirmation, Yaga realizes that if Yuki's curse technique is just as Yuji explained, Nagino hasn't been playing them since the mountain. This whole entire mission from the get-go has been a facade. Thinking back, Yaga remembers a conversation he had with Nagino right after the exchange event. When asked about the Fukuoka students, Nagino proudly bragged about how Rindo was a top-notch sorcerer when it came to fighting, and Yuki was the perfect support with his barrier technique. And for some unknown reason, the mention of a barrier technique makes Yaga uneasy. But Nagino tells Yaga to stop being so gloomy, as Yuki's curse technique is more of an upgraded curtain or veil, and it's nothing like her old ability. Still a little unnerved, Nagino asserts himself again, telling the Tokyo principal that after 20 years, they can't keep acting like what happened didn't happen, saying that in order for his students to grow up right, Nagino doesn't want them to be sad all of the time, like Yaga, as that's what she would want. And Yaga finally nods and smiles, complimenting Nagino that as long as they've got a teacher like him, they'll surely turn out all right. A purely innocent catch-up between friends, but under new light, Yaga realizes that the answer was staring him in the face from that very moment. Admitting he was suspicious the second Nagino brought up Yuki's barrier, but he decided not to stir up trouble investigating, and he gave an old pal the benefit of the doubt. But now, Yaga can only see mistakes, knowing Nagino was being deceptive from the start. And Yaga says he better explain everything to his students fast, as if Rosetsu has truly acquired what Yaga refers to as prayer formation technique, the amount of time they have left has dramatically shortened. In a flashback that goes all the way back 26 years, we meet a young Masamichi Yaga and Kensuke Nagino as they are just arriving in Fukuoka for the first time. At the moment, the two were small-time sorcerers, no different than our current trio, arguing about wanting to sightsee instead of taking the mission seriously. It's not just Yaga telling Nagino to be more professional though, as a third member of their team reveals themselves, a woman named Sarah Kozuki, who tells Nagino that his loud energy is embarrassing. But even though their target's a special grade curse, Nagino admits as long as the three of them are together, it should be simple as business as usual, brushing it off and leaving the two of them in the dust to go find a restaurant. Sarah sighs, and Yaga pokes fun at her, saying he feels sorry she's got such a Neanderthal for a husband, which makes Sarah laugh, saying there are times where she appreciates Nagino's enthusiasm, but she admits that Nagino being this way does make her scared, as an extrovert like him would never cope well with being alone.
Foreshadowing is a literary device in which—
Fast forward to just after the three sorcerers encountered Rosetsu, the trio back away as Nagino pulls Sarah out of battle, asking what the hell happened to her back there. A fatigued Sarah admits she has no idea, and all she knows is she was hit by the curse's technique. Meanwhile, the special grade we already know way too well laughs hysterically to himself. Rosetsu saying he couldn't have struck a better jackpot, snatching such an immaculate technique. Yaga yells to Nagino and Sarah to fall back as the trio make their escape, and Rosetsu watches them run away with glee, declaring that after this, it won't matter how many reinforcements they bring, no one will ever be able to stop him again. Time passes, and it's explained to us that while the fatigued Sarah was left in the hospital to rest, many other sorcerers were dispatched to Kyushu to help support the assault against Rosetsu. However, because Rosetsu had full control of prayer formation, every single battle that was fought after this was extremely disadvantageous for the sorcerers. Normally used to support allies, prayer formation technique, as seen with Yuji, can be used to boost the strength of friendlies and benefits group battles tremendously. But when used against sorcerers, the curses inflicted by prayer formation can be like poison, causing disorientation, distress, and making it next to impossible to efficiently control one's cursed energy. Despite weeks of hard battles and various teams participating, the war that waged against Rosetsu resulted in the loss of many lives and seemed to have no real end in sight. Because of this, a decision was reached. And all the more tragically, Yaga had to be the one to tell his friend what the higher-ups had decided. With Rosetsu only gaining a larger stock of curse techniques and becoming more and more of an impossible hill to overcome, there was only one option the higher-ups saw as a way forward. And despite Nagino telling Yaga to shut up in hopes of avoiding reality, Yaga confirms Nagino's darkest fears. The higher-ups had sentenced Sarah to execution in order to remove prayer formation from Rosetsu's arsenal. Nagino was rightfully enraged by this, asking how Yaga could possibly accept it, but Yaga tries to tell Nagino that even if they did appeal, the old conservatives at headquarters would never listen to reason after their mind was made up. Nagino demands to know who in the world would suggest such an idea, and Sarah, entering the room at just that moment, reveals it was her who proposed her own execution. Dumbfounded, Nagino tries to convince Sarah to change her mind, telling her that she shouldn't feel like any of this is her fault. But Sarah cuts Nagino off, saying things like she couldn't have known or it couldn't be helped don't bring back any of the lost sorcerers from the dead, admitting she lost the right to live the moment she let herself get caught by Rosetsu's tricks. If anyone understands the danger her technique poses, it's Sarah, and with Rosetsu threatening to create the Grand Kyushu Barrier, where humans will be ruled and harvested like cattle by curses, she could never live with herself if such a thing occurred because of her. Nagino begs Sarah to let him know how he's supposed to live without her, and Almost as if she doesn't even have an answer for that, she ignores it, revealing instead that the fact Rosetsu has let her roam free this entire time means he would never expect her to make a play like this. Meaning the best possible strategy for Jujutsu High to take would be invading Rosetsu's domain the moment she dies, killing him when he least expects to be powerless. With emotions high, Sarah asks the two of them to live long and fulfilling lives before barging out of the room. And out of pure desperation, Nagino looks to his friend in tears, asking if it's possible for him and Yaga to stage a secret exorcism with just the two of them, getting rid of Rosetsu before Sarah's execution. And Yaga, choked up with guilt himself, tries to be confident, telling his friend of course, and that they'll fight together to the end. But as we cut back to current day, it's all too apparent that Yaga and Nagino were unsuccessful in their attempts. And Sarah's execution was secretly carried out before either of them could react. The final operation on Rosetsu beginning right at the time of her death, just as she said. Unfortunately though, despite all of that sacrifice, even that apparently wasn't enough to exorcise the cursed Rosetsu. And now that he once again has prayer formation in his grasp, he's unlikely to make the same mistakes as before. Already taking precautions and kidnapping Yuki to ensure Grand Kyushu Barrier can't be interfered with. And knowing there isn't much time left before Rosetsu enacts these plans, the sorcerers estimate they only have a couple days left before the final battle. Meanwhile, in the very heart of Kyushu, in the epicenter of a large crater, lies a tall, tree-looking vessel, a villainous location for Kenjaku and Rosetsu to once again meet up and discuss the process of building this grand barrier. The giant tree in the middle serving as the domain's cornerstone, fueled to nearly overflow with over 20 years of Rosetsu's stored cursed energy, with Prayer Formation's user Kaito Yuki imprisoned at its core. Kenjaku is intrigued and also wonders what happened to the king's vessel, but Rosetsu admits it still required some time to develop and was seemingly difficult to control, so instead of creating tension, he just let the vessel roam free for now, as truthfully, it's only insurance to act as a dominant source of energy in the barrier that will hopefully reinforce it enough to even keep someone like Gojo Satoru out of the picture. Kenjaku is surprised to see Rosetsu really considering every possibility, but Rosetsu knows full well there isn't any future where he's standing against the Honored One, revealing he merely plans on waiting out Gojo's natural lifespan before expanding the Grand Barrier across the entire globe. This makes Kenjaku laugh, knowing that this means they'll eventually be enemies in the future. Rosetsu catches wind of this mockery and asks if Geto wants to settle this now and fight, but Kenjaku admits he still wants to see the Grand Barrier in action, wishing Rosetsu all the success before bidding him farewell. And speaking of Gojo, as all of the sorcerers are making preparations for their final fight, the trio's favorite teacher gives them all a ring to check on them. Megumi asks why Gojo can't just teleport over here and handle the mission for them, but the Honored One humorously blows off the crisis, claiming that if he isn't here protecting Tokyo, then curses like Jogo and Hanami could catch wind and cause trouble. But regardless of Gojo trying to get out of working, he says he isn't worried about his students losing to some special grade. Everyone is shocked Gojo could be so nonchalant about it, prompting Gojo to ask his students if any of them truly plan on losing. And in unison, all three of them reject that, making Gojo laugh, thinking maybe he has been rubbing off on them, wishing them the best of luck and hanging up. Weirdly enough, everyone feels oddly relaxed now, almost as if they've got nothing to be worried about in this upcoming battle. And back on the other line, Nanami's surprised to see Gojo of all people offering words of encouragement, to which Gojo simply shrugs it off and smiles, looking off into the night sky, most likely towards the direction of Fukuoka, thinking that he's excited to see what this next generation of sorcerers are gonna be able to show him. And as those final days pass, we cut to all of the remaining Jujutsu High students of Kyoto and Tokyo who ready their final deployment. However, as if things weren't already worse enough, Ijichi runs into headquarters just before everyone can leave, announcing that multiple cursed energy spikes have suddenly appeared all over Fukuoka, including multiple hordes of Rosetsu's cursed minions being spotted throughout civilian areas. Yaga realizes they were just one step too late, believing the Grand Kyushu Barrier must have already began deployment, and with Jujutsu headquarters refusing to send in any extra reinforcements due to the last Rosetsu incident, it's all up to the sorcerers that are present now to stop this national crisis from spreading further. Meanwhile, somewhere in the depths of the mountain, Nagino is alone, waiting in position for Principal Yaga and his students. Except Nagino isn't by himself, as a vile sound can be heard echoing back to him as he talks. Nagino tells whoever he is with to not be afraid, as he and Rosetsu have been planning this day for years, and that soon, once all of this is over, they'll be able to live together again peacefully, as they should have always been years ago. Because this is going to become the peaceful world they always talked about, right, Sarah? Racing down the mountain highway at top speeds, Ichichi breaks multiple traffic laws in an attempt to get Yuji, Megami, Rindo, and Nobara to the front of the Grand Kyushu barrier as soon as possible. Unfortunately for them, on their next turn, Ichichi is flung off the road out of nowhere, and the group is sent tumbling down the cliffside all the way to the bottom. In full video game anime logic though, miraculously, no one is injured in this accident. But with the car left damaged beyond repair, the students might have no other choice but to begin this operation on foot. Considering that from the location they were just derailed comes an approaching horde of cursed minions, it's pretty obvious all of this was Rosetsu's doing in order to slow them down anyway. So the students rush towards their goal, leaving Ichichi behind to search for Principal Yaga and Panda's car. And speaking of which, their car, which was directly behind Ichichi's, was also ambushed off the road. However, unlike the others, the one waiting for them after the wreckage is the former Fukuoka High principal, Kensuke Nagino. Realizing that none of this madness will end unless he finishes his business with Nagino, Yaga asks Panda to forgive him, but Yaga needs Panda to carry on alone from here. And Panda shakes his head, laughing at his father figure, telling Yaga it's written all over his face that he's still trying to save Nagino and bring him back to their side. And choked up, Yaga can only, once again, apologize. But Panda reminds him no one on the team would ever hold a grudge against him for something so human. Acknowledging his son's maturity, Panda begins to clear a path through all the approaching cursed spirits, letting Yaga through to face Nagino himself. Finally catching up with the former principal, Nagino mockingly asks his old friend how easy it could be to leave their students behind, but Yaga corrects him, declaring Yaga students aren't so weak as to lose to cursed spirits of that degree. And finally alone, Yaga can confront Nagino about how he could possibly align himself with the curse that killed Sarah. But Nagino is quick to remind Yaga it wasn't Rosetsu that killed Sarah, it was Jujutsu High, considering them both equally as evil. Nagino is happy that Yaga seems willing to take their time and talk things out, as this is the perfect time to let him in on a little secret Nagino's been keeping. Lifting a hand up to his eye patch and removing it, a cursed black eye is revealed to have taken root in Nagino's face. Yaga is shocked, looking at the dark black abyss staring back at him, and Nagino says it hurts to be looked at like a monster by his best friend, revealing that this cursed eye is exactly why he partnered up with Rosetsu in the first place. And we fade away into a flashback of Nagino's past 26 years ago, just after Sarah was executed and Rosetsu was supposedly exorcised. The broken Nagino decides to stay in Fukuoka alone, unable to face Tokyo Jujutsu High ever again after what they did to the love of his life. Angry and without purpose, Nagino relentlessly hunts down cursed spirits and exorcises them, not for justice or Jujutsu High, but because it was the only outlet he could find to take his anger out on. Somehow, on the seemingly never-ending path of violence, by random chance, Nagino once again came across the special grade curse known as Rosetsu deep in the Kyushu mountains. In utter disbelief, Nagino is speechless at Rosetsu still being alive. But even more surprisingly, the curse reveals that he's actually been searching for Nagino for quite some time. Obviously though, seeing the curse responsible for his lover's death drives Nagino into a blind rage, and the sorcerer repeatedly charges at the curse with attacks, while Rosetsu just dodges, doing its best to try and coax Nagino into actual conversation. But Rosetsu quickly begins to get annoyed. Nagino refuses to listen, Nagino claiming he has no need to give a curse spirit, especially this one, any time of day. In an attempt to relate to Nagino on some kind of personal level, Rosetsu explains that if this is because Nagino misses Sarah, Rosetsu can empathize with him there, as if anyone can understand how tragic of a loss she was. Rosetsu says it's him. which honestly just angers Nagino more, thinking the curse is making fun of him. But instead of reason, this time Rosetsu chooses to merely just show Nagino why he should listen, using a portion of his cursed energy to conjure up a mirror replica of Sarah right before Nagino's eyes. The widowed man, utterly and tragically mentally defeated at this point, falls to his knees at the sight of his late wife, begging to know if it's really her. But Rosetsu snaps her away the moment Nagino sees a glimpse of her smile, claiming that's all he can offer for now, but he hopes that's enough to get Nagino to lower his guard. And without hesitation, as he gets back up, Nagino declares outright whatever Rosetsu needs him to do, he'll help, promising to play along with recreating Rosetsu's Grand Kyushu Barrier plan so long as he can be with Sarah again, creating the very binding vow that locks us into this crisis situation we're in now. And in present day, Nagino finishes his story by apologizing to Yaga for using an old friend and his students like this, but that he has to understand, Nagino would do anything to be with Sarah again. However, after hearing all of this, Yaga refuses to sympathize, seeing Nagino for the delusional fool he's truly become, reminding Nagino that as a Jujutsu sorcerer, he should know better than anyone it's an absolute impossibility to revive the dead. But this makes Nagino laugh in Yaga's face, as he tells his friend not to be so confident, especially considering Rosetsu has already fulfilled his end of the bargain. Yaga is confused, but Nagino changes the topic, telling Yaga he should be ashamed of himself for ignoring Sarah, as she's actually been here the entire time. Suddenly, a sinister cursed energy emerges into view that Yaga was unable to really make out before. Finally noticing the bulging, pulsating mass of flesh that has wrapped its disgusting tentacles all around Nagino's body, suctioning itself to his chest. With large beady eyes and a wide gaping maw, Yaga looks back in horror as the reflection of the creature appears on his sunglasses. It's almost as if seeing his friend in such a sorry state leaves him speechless, outright unable to process the fact his former friend would really believe this thing could be his lover. With multiple emotions overflowing, Yaga yells out to his friend in utter desperation, demanding to know just how far Rosetsu has made Nagino fall. But Nagino shrugs off this heartfelt reaction, just asking Yaga to come and join their side, recompleting their old trio and getting back to better times. Knowing it's impossible now to ever bring Nagino back with how far he's gone, Yaga accepts this fate and begins to release his full power, letting Nagino know it's time for all of this madness to end. And honestly, I really gotta say, I'm more than willing to take a copyright claim here. This is one of the absolute best scenes in the entire game, and considering Masamichi Yaga's voice actor won't really get very many big moments to shine in the main series, I feel like I'm depriving you of the amount of effort he clearly put into this. What's meant to be a battle to the death between two old friends. A scene that, even for just mobile game avatars and text boxes, the voice acting and the emotions in this scene are undeniable. I would never be able to describe it as good as it comes off on its own. So please hit that like button and subscribe, because I'm just gonna let this play.
私は嬉しかったんだ。お前が過去を乗り越え、前に進み始めてくれたと。だが、違った。お前は今も過去にとらわれ、26年前と同じ場所に立ち止まり続けている。違うな、正道。俺はずっと前へ進み続けているさ。サラと過ごす未来のために。光月は死んだ。俺たちはあの時救えなかった。お前の隣にいるのはただの呪霊でしか。知ったような口を聞くんじゃねえよ。ここにいるのは紛れもなくサラだ。あの頃と同じように俺を律してくれる。あの頃と同じように俺に笑いかけてくれる。そんなものはまやかしに過ぎない。 老絶に頭をいじられてイカれているんだお前は。俺にとってはサラだけが本物で他の全てが前貸しだ。お前に何と言われようと揺るぎはしない。だったらそんな考え事を叩き壊してやる。Nagino!
Yaga moves in for the final blow. He prepares to take both Nagino and the parasite out in a single attack. But just as Yaga prepares to launch, the parasite throws itself between the two friends, making Nagino panic, crying out almost nonsensically for Yaga to stop and never take Sarah away from him. And for some reason, in that split moment, a warm, familiar feeling comes over Yaga, reminding him of his old friend Sarah. Even though, in his heart of hearts, he knows it to not be true, he can't help but feel her presence in this one single second, making Yaga hesitate. Just long enough for the parasite to seize an opening and stab its multiple tendrils directly through Yaga's body, critically wounding and incapacitating the principal. As he drops to the ground, Yaga curses himself for falling for such a dumb trick, not knowing why something like sentimentality would get in the way at a time like this. Having the time to recompose himself, Nagino looks down at his injured friend, deciding that if this truly is the ultimatum for them, he might as well take Yaga's life now and not drag things out longer. But as he's distracted, a loud yell echoes out from behind Nagino. As he turns around, out from the forest charges Saki Rindo, who with a blood-curdling war cry, throws her cursed energy charged fist at the cursed parasite at full strength, slamming into it with purely raw force and rocketing it high speed far off into the mountain range. Disheveled, Nagino cries out for his lover, turning to his former student and calling her a bastard. Nagino charges up and readies his attacks in fury, but the surprisingly calm and at peace Rindo inhales and exhales, telling her sensei that she'll be settling this score here and now. Much to everyone's surprise, Nagino is completely outmatched here, unable to keep up with Rindo's significantly higher level of curse output, demanding to know why Rindo has so much more cursed energy than normal, which makes Rindo shake her head as she sadly reminds her teacher that he was the one that helped her discover how her curse technique works in the first place. Catastrophe Reversal Curse turns pain into power. And because he's so far gone now, Nagino can't even remember that. Obviously going through extreme inner turmoil as she battles what was supposed to be her adopted father, Nagino reminds Rindo she never meant anything to him in the first place, so she should really stop caring, as her and Yuki were merely just means to an end. But Rindo rejects this, which confuses Nagino. She tells her sensei that no matter what he says to her, she could never not be grateful to him. Whatever Nagino wants to claim his reasons for raising her were, that does not change the fact that without him, and she most certainly would never have become who she is now. Letting Nagino know that even if this was all some illusion for him, he could never take away the realness she feels from her memories. And almost as if everything in that very moment clicked, Nagino remembers what he just said to Yaga not even a moment ago, that Sarah would always be real to him, even if it's just an illusion for everyone else. And if someone tried to take her away, then everything else was the illusion. No one could stop this from being real for him. Realizing that even though Nagino never meant to, he imparted his very own belief system into his students. Ironically, just like Yaga told Nagino he would, way back before all of this began. Realizing that Nagino could never reject Sarah, just as Rindo would never reject him, he finally comes to terms with this. Dropping his hands to his sides and relinquishing all of his cursed energy at once, Nagino looks down to the ground, unable to watch as his student charges up her last attack. Nagino, just loud enough for her to hear, tells Rindo that she's right in what she believes, and that it's great she was able to come to such a conclusion on her own. Rindo, who nods in acknowledgement of her sensei's words, thanks Nagino one final time for everything he's done, and as the impending doom of Saki Rindo's final blow heads right for him, Nagino can't help himself but smile, fully ready to take accountability for his actions, so long as it's what his student believes is right. With all said and done, Rindo and Yaga look over the unconscious Nagino in concern, both of them apologizing for causing the other trouble, admitting it was an emotional moment for the two, and neither meant to intrude on the other's closure. However, Yaga realizes that if Rindo's here, it must mean she got separated from Yuji and the others, and Ichichi arrives just on time to explain all of them went off alone to find Rosetsu's hideout on foot. Meanwhile, inside the Kyushu barrier's epicenter, the final amount of energy has been gathered to complete its deployment ritual. Upon activation, suddenly a surge of cursed energy is released, transforming the barrier's central antenna into a twisting, winding crimson tree, as a sinister miasma begins to flood throughout the entire mountain range. Rosetsu's claws grow wide, and the barrier continues to expand by the minute, making Rosetsu launch into hysterics as he declares his victory. Ranting about how all of Kyushu will soon be his domain, he raves wildly about the idea of reducing all of humanity to livestock, harvesting them by the thousands to pluck forth the ultimate curse technique, stripping them of everything and anything he can for his own. And during this tirade, behind Rosetsu sits the king's vessel, its monstrous power pumping the Grand Barrier full of massive amounts of fuel. However, compared to its master, it looks less than amused, almost too similar to its original personality. The king's vessel watches on in pure boredom as the scene fades to black. While Panda stays behind with Yaga, Rindo manages to catch up to Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara just as the barrier ritual completes, only being able to watch as its toxic miasma spreads throughout the whole area. Despite everyone's worries that they already failed, Megumi seems to be confident there's no way this could be the complete Kyushu barrier he's heard about, claiming it's much too unimpressive right now to be in its full state. Assuming this is one of multiple stages, they do their best to steel their nerves and carry on, knowing that while it would have been better if they stopped Rosetsu before deployment at all, if they still have time, they're going to need to make the most of it. With the knowledge they have about Yuki's curse technique, they know there has to be a central point acting as the barrier's cornerstone somewhere. And with that in mind, they set their sights on finding and destroying it to hopefully take the barrier down with it. Rindo wonders just what they'll do about Rosetsu after all of that, but Megumi reminds them that stopping the barrier is their highest priority, especially considering they're directly in the belly of the beast, so they need to avoid unnecessary combat until all of that is taken care of. At the same time, able to sense their presence inside his territory, Rosetsu scoffs at the stupidity of Jujutsu Hide to try and fight him under these circumstances, laughing at how similar this is shaping up to be to the war 26 years ago. Rosetsu can't help but be intrigued by a sorcerer's ability to charge in despite the impossible odds that face them, all in the name of exercising some curse, wondering just how long it will take until all of them fall deep inside what is now the land of curses, which proves to be just as agonizing and toxic as Yaga described. The four students forced to fight off the hordes of curse minions that stand in their way under intense atmosphere, almost as if an extra layer of gravity was placed over them. However, surprisingly, much to Rosetsu's shock, the students are able to withstand the pressure and continue fighting, as Rindo admits their quote-unquote plan is actually working. Cutting back to reveal that before the students infiltrated the barrier, Yaga had actually given each of them a shard of the last cornerstone Yuki had created in his attempt to save Yuji just before being kidnapped. Because Curse Technique Boost Night Hunt, or Prayer Formation Technique, whatever you really want to call it, has strict conditions as to not buff or debuff its own user if those that enter the barrier are holding a piece of the user's cursed item, that same rule should apply to them. Meaning, as long as the four sorcerers keep that shard of Yuki's final vow on their person, the effects of Rosetsu's barrier, which ultimately belongs to Yuki at the end of the day, will be lessened for them. Although Megumi isn't sure how long these small fragments can last, especially with the barrier growing even stronger by the minute, but it gives them just enough of an edge to continue fighting their way through Rosetsu's forces for now. And they do, paving deep enough of a path into the mountain to start to worry the special grade. And despite his hesitation, Rosetsu sees no other choice but to hasten the speed of the barrier's expansion, commanding the king's vessel to stop holding back and release all of its energy into the cornerstone to put the finishing touches on early. Although the king's vessel seems annoyed at the thought of taking orders, it obliges, as a powerful fluctuation forces its way through the cornerstone's roots, channeling throughout the barrier and even making Rosetsu shudder beneath its ferocity. The curse shakes with pure excitement, making Rosetsu cheer as this extreme strength begins to flood through all of his minions as well, boosting their curse energy outputs and size to become even more deadly than before. A power-up immediately felt by Yuji, Megumi, Nobara, and Rindo, who could not only see the overwhelming negative energy whirl around chaotically, but also witness the cursed minions begin to mutate and look even more like the King of Curses themselves. A presence that Yuji and Megumi clearly feel, as it snakes its influence throughout every corner of the barrier. And for the sorcerers who are already against an uphill battle, this just makes their venture into the barrier even tougher. However, against all odds, the four of them are able to fight deep enough to begin to see the massive crimson tree in the horizon. But just as hope enters their eyes and they rejoice, a dark-toned voice immediately carves out any sense of relief they may have felt. The students turning to see the 10 Shadows vessel, also having further mutated and gained strength from the king's influence, standing in their way. With no idea how long is left until the Grand Barrier's completion, Fushiguro urges the others to go on without him, as this curse was always his responsibility. And as if this had all been rehearsed, Rindo, Yuji, and Nobara make a break past the 10 Shadows vessel without hesitating, putting faith in their friend and not even giving him a look back as they continue to make their way towards the barrier's core. Megumi knows that if he can accomplish exercising this vessel now, not only will he return to full strength, but they'll be able to make a massive dent in Rosetsu's guard. Making a direct one-on-one challenge, the Shadow Vessel tells Megumi to come and try him, both of them clapping their hands together to make the sign for the Thunderbird Nue as they summon forth their Shikigami. However, because the Shadow Vessel can create multiple Nue at once, no matter how hard Megumi tries, he is incapable of even fighting back, especially with the power of Sukuna making the curse significantly stronger. The vessel calls Megumi an embarrassment to the 10 Shadows technique, demanding to know if he's ever going to actually participate in this fight, and if he should just finish things now. But just as things were getting boring, suddenly a humongous quake shakes the whole mountain, stopping everyone in their tracks, and making both Megumi and the vessel stare up to the sky, as the cursed miasma begins to intensify even further across the barrier. The two Shadow users realizing what this means simultaneously, that the Grand Kyushu Barrier has reached its second and intermediate stage of preparation. While all of this is happening within the barrier, outside in the suburbs that surround the main Kyushu mountain, Miwa, Momo, and the other Kyoto sorcerers have been working to clear out the civilian areas of Rosetsu's minions. After slaying all of the enemies in a single part of the town, Momo and Miwa make plans to move towards the next recon location, when suddenly, they too feel the intensity of the Grand Barrier grow and spread its influence further. Both of them looking up to see the veil begin to crawl over even the town itself, signaling to them that the Tokyo sorcerers might have actually failed the mission. Even worse, the evacuation of civilians hasn't been completed, meaning as the cursed energy's dense atmosphere weighs heavily on the area, even ordinary people become afflicted by the miasma's toxin, some falling ill or even causing car accidents due to falling unconscious. Momo and Miwa jump on the witch's broom to make an escape, as a massive fatigue begins to plague their body and minds. They push themselves to outrace the edge of the barrier, making Miwa wonder what they could even possibly do at this point to stop all this. However, all Momo can do is apologize, as she grows so weak she can no longer maintain flight, losing consciousness and dropping both of them to the ground with a high fall. At the same time, back at the outskirts of Kyushu's mountain, Ichichi also falls ill and collapses as the barrier expands. Yaga is concerned about everyone's failure, but suddenly he's interrupted with the awakening of Nagino, who, after discovering the cursed spirit that was substituting for Sarah had been lost, perhaps even forever, he actually surprisingly seems to accept this. and for some reason, even comes off as having some kind of change of heart. Nagino asks Yaga in their desperation to release him from his restraints, saying they no longer have a reason to not trust him, and that now he's the only one that can help them, as he is the only one that knows how to stop this. However, after everything that's happened, Panda and Yaga are hesitant, and they're unsure if Nagino has truly earned this kind of trust. But before we can know what happens, we cut back to the 3 remaining students, Yuji, Rindo, and Nobara, as they're continuing to fight their way to the barrier's center. But with the progression of the Grand Barrier reaching worse levels, Rindo worries if there's even a point to continuing now. Thankfully, Nobara is still confident they haven't reached completion, and knowing they're on more than borrowed time at this point, she commands Itadori to stop letting them hold him back and make way full speed for the cornerstone. Yuji, hesitant, knows full well only one of them needs to make it in time to shatter the barrier, so he says he'll agree only on the condition that Nobara and Rindo both promise not to die. The girls immediately telling Yuji not to underestimate them, saying that he should make that exact same promise. And with that, once again, the sorcerers are split off, Yuji entering breakneck pace and ricocheting off, leaving Nobara and Rindo in the dust. However, before the girls even get a second to breathe, a humongous horde of Sukuna spawn make their appearance, forcing the 2 of them to stay and fend them off so none of them can follow Itadori. Let's rewind a bit though, as we return to the battle between Fushiguro and the 10 Shadows vessel right where we left off. As the vessel brags about the Grand Barrier's progression, Megami is able to parse out at least that this is only the second of 3 phases in its deployment. With the knowledge that there is still a chance to stop this, Megami finally decides it's time to fight more recklessly, abandoning defense for offense and calling out Divine Dog to start getting serious. However, even though Megami is finally able to keep up pace and close the distance with his opponent, with the Shadow Vessel's increased durability from the field advantage, it barely takes any damage from his attacks. And with one last swipe, one of the vessel's Nue ripped Megami high into the air, ascending at intense speeds with full intention of nosediving back downwards. While Megami struggles and he makes desperate pleas for the bird to stop and release him, weirdly enough, after the right amount of effort, the Nue actually does respond to Megami's command, lowering and safely placing the sorcerer on the ground, which shocks Megami and only serves to annoy the Shadow Vessel, who hasn't yet seemed to figure out what exactly just happened. However, with his quick intuition, Megami correctly deduces that he was actually able to reclaim ownership over the Shikigami just by adding a bit of his own cursed energy back to its core. Intellectualizing this as the vessel's technique merely being an extension of Megami's own, and considering it's even powered by sapping him of energy in general, by putting his quote-unquote essence back into the Shikigami, Megami can actually regain control, even though he's not the original summoner. Well, technically by his logic, he is the original summoner, but you get what I mean, right? Now, knowing a fatal flaw in Cursed Technique Snatch's design, Megami changes his attitude from worried to cocky, arrogantly taunting the vessel into trying to attack him again, but this time at full strength, claiming that if the vessel gives Megami enough time, he'll easily be able to overcome such a one-trick pony. And since the Shadow Vessel was growing bored of the games anyway, it obliges Megami's request and sicks all of its Nue clones on Fushiguro at once, with full intentions of finishing the fight. But as Megami is swallowed by the horde of shadows, assumedly being torn asunder under the thunderous claws of multiple Nue, when the Shadow Vessel sighs in disappointment and calls the Nue off, none of the horde listens to him at all, which this time makes the vessel definitely notice something off. As all of the Nue peacefully flutter away from Megami at once, seeming to float by his side in allegiance, the annoyed vessel demands to know what the hell is going on, still unable to read between the lines. And Megami mocks it, since he finds it so simple, explaining that he wasn't hit by Nue's lightning because he didn't allow it to hit him, revealing that Rosetsu requires the stolen ability to maintain some connection with the original owner to siphon power, creating a vessel of 2 different cursed energies that can be fought over for control, meaning a user can regain full and total possession over their stolen technique with just the tiniest bit of cursed energy advantage. Much to the Shadow Vessel's bewilderment, absolutely dumbfounded that Cursed Technique Snatch could have such a terrible loophole, Megami admits he doesn't really know what to tell the curse, and that who he really should should be complaining to is his boss. Now, with the tables turned completely, Megami mimics exactly what the Shadow Vessel said to the sorcerer earlier, wondering aloud how long the curse can last under assault from all these Nue at once, which makes the once proud vessel quiver, shouting as it's suddenly completely surrounded and stabbed at every angle by its own Nue's claws, being ripped into two halves and shattered into pure cursed residuals, being exorcised finally once and for all. As Megami's lost cursed energy instantly returns, Rosetsu feels a sudden loss of power throughout the barrier. Satisfied he was able to get his revenge, Megami tries to continue making his way through the barrier, but he can't help but fall to his knees, unfortunately sustaining way more damage in the previous battle than he had originally hoped, and finding himself barely able to carry on. However, even though he knows he'll be completely useless in battle, the knowledge Megami just found out about Curse Technique Snatch could give them the exact edge they need to destroy Rosetsu's barrier, giving him the inspiration to continue on. And speaking of Rosetsu, just as all of this is going down, we check back in with Itadori as he's sprinting full speed, dodging every horde of cursed minions that attempts to stop him on his way. Despite doing his best to ignore the small fry, Yuji does catch a whiff of a certain cursed energy that instantly makes him freeze in his tracks. He stops just as he enters a wide open field inside of the barrier, right before the Crimson Tree. And as he looks around at the empty, silent boss arena, Yuji casually calls out to the culprit, saying they might as well show themselves, and they're not able to hide from him anymore. Which, right on cue, Rosetsu emerges out from nothingness, laughing and complimenting Itadori on his sensory skills. Deciding to be open and honest for a moment, Rosetsu admits to Yuji that he's really the only person left out of everyone that he considers a threat. While losing the Shadow Vessel was a shame, Rosetsu knows Megami is essentially incapacitated now, and neither Nobara or Rindo are strong enough to stand against Rosetsu on their own. But this just makes Itadori stand strong, declaring he won't be wasting any more time then, and that it's time he finally exorcised Rosetsu, which excites the special grade, taunting Itadori and admitting, really? Because the longer they fight, the more powerful he'll become inside of the barrier. But almost as if Yuji completely ignored this, his maximum cursed energy flares out violently, choosing to only correct his words in response, saying he's not going to exorcise Rosetsu, he's going to be the one that kills Rosetsu. As Yuji and Rosetsu begin their battle, Rosetsu opts to simply play keep away and summon his cursed minions to do the attacking, annoying Yuji, who asks if Rosetsu really came all the way out here himself, why is he just stalling? However, even though Itadori's strength is more than enough to take out the fodder of Sukuna buff minions, he realizes being stranded out here by his lonesome, completely outnumbered, is probably not a good situation to be in no matter what the circumstances are, especially if Rosetsu's main goal is just to keep Yuji away from the cornerstone. Thankfully, just as the cursed spirit gets a little cocky, a sudden pulsation strikes Rosetsu's senses, notifying him that Kensuke Nagino has entered the Grand Barrier. Rosetsu is baffled as to what could be the reason he's doing here at a time like this, which is just enough of a distraction for Yuji to land a rock throw right between Rosetsu's eyes. Snapping back to his senses, Rosetsu has no idea what Nagino is up to, but he's confident their binding vow will keep Nagino from doing anything critical to his plans. So Rosetsu places his focus back on Yuji. Meanwhile, Nobara and Rindo have managed to fight their way through to the center of the barrier, ironically, before Yuji ever even made it there. As they scan their surroundings, they're surprised to see the barrier's throne and core left completely empty and unattended. Rindo questions what might have happened to Yuji, but Nobara says they don't have time to worry about people that aren't here, and they need to put all of their focus into destroying the barrier before it gets too late. However, try as they might, even Rindo's recent surge of power isn't enough to make a dent in the cornerstone's exterior surface. Even when Rindo can leave a mark, it instantly regenerates as if nothing ever happened. Worst of all, their location is now getting snuffed out by patrol minions who have begun to surround them from every angle. And with no other choice, Nobara's only idea is to make their way inside of the cornerstone and hope there might be some kind of weak point further on inside. The two girls refuse to give up and make a break for the cavern that leads deeper into the Crimson Tree. and it's not too long before they realize they're just inside of what seems to be an actual living, breathing curse. Yet despite this gross, fleshy cave system seeming to sprawl far and wide, the massive amount of cursed minions inside that seem to be protecting the sanctum aren't the least bit discouraging, because seeing how dire this situation is, they have to be on the right track as they ignite their cursed energy and continue fighting on through. Finally beginning to push their way into the innermost chamber, they're met with the grisly sight of Yuki Kaito's unconscious body intermingled with the most core roots of the cornerstone. Seeing her classmate, Rindo instantly makes a run for Yuki to try and remove him from the barrier. But before she can even get close, Nobara is yelling at her to dodge, as a massive hulking ogre sends its fist crash landing right to where the Fukuoka student was standing. Feeling the giant cursed creature's extreme aura and presence, Rindo and Nobara realize this might actually be the toughest curse Rosetsu's created yet. As the girl's situation intensifies, on Itadori's side, no matter how hard he tries, he can't seem to land any critical blows on Rosetsu, the curse just dodging and wasting more and more of the sorcerer's time. Knowing as long as he can just keep delaying Yuji, the Grand Barrier's completion can't be that far off. Though, as if once again shattering this illusion of confidence, another fluctuation hits Rosetsu's senses. This time, it's a cry for help from the Crimson Tree, telling Rosetsu that Nobara and Rindo have begun a battle with its final guardian in its innermost sanctum. And this alarm is one Rosetsu cannot ignore. Growing extremely frustrated at the fact they were able to just walk right past the king's vessel, who we know clearly just outright abandoned its post for some reason. But Rosetsu does not. So while he's distracted again, he slips up and falls into another one of Yuji's combos, getting dealt a heavy blow and getting pushed back. Rosetsu is beginning to grow angry that despite taking every precaution, all of his advantages are falling apart right at the end. He refuses to accept this though, and instead decides that he needs to take Yuji out as soon as possible so he can return to the cornerstone side. And as he begins to charge up more power, the sudden influx of strength immediately tips Yuji off that something has happened elsewhere that's making Rosetsu grow desperate. Back inside the tree, Rindo and Nobara are feeling the effects of exhaustion set in from all of their previous battles, fighting their absolute hardest against the cursed ogre defending Yuki. Unfortunately though, neither of them can really amass enough cursed energy to effectively damage the ogre's outer shell, which forces them on the back foot and gets them to lose ground and take damage. However, now faced with no other option, Rindo and Nobara lock eyes with one another, deciding it's time to put quote-unquote that to the test. The two girls instantly synchronize their movements, springing into different directions so the ogre can't keep track. Taking the last of her remaining nails, Nobara uses all of her strength to scatter them throughout the air and all around the ogre. At the same time, Rindo increases her speed, beginning to punch as many of the nails as she can deep into the ogre, puncturing the skin and lodging them further and further into its body. And just as the ogre attempts to counter, Rindo gives up the volley and jumps out of the way, yelling at Nobara to hit it, which signals Nobara to strike what might be her most aura-fueled pose in the entire series, which is crazy that it's in a mobile game. But as she lifts her hand up, Nobara snaps her fingers, activating Straw Doll Hairpin, which ignites every cursed nail that was stabbed into the ogre like a chain bomb, causing that hulking body to blow up with a spraying geyser of cursed energy, splitting it open from the inside out and exorcising it in one blast. Yet even though the battle's over, they can't celebrate because the war is far from done. Even with the cornerstone sanctum clear of enemies, the girls still need to find a way to save Yuki and break the cornerstone. But now with how out of gas the girls really are, no matter how hard they try to pull Yuki from his rooted prison, the tight hold the Crimson Tree has on its energy source seems impossible to break. And in this final hour, with every possible option being exhausted, it's finally now when the hopelessness begins to set in, making Nobara and Rindo wonder if they really struggled all this way for nothing. However, the two are surprisingly interrupted by the arrival of former principal Kensuke Nagino, who wanders into the sanctum and stands between them out of nowhere. Beyond confused, Rindo demands to know why Nagino would show his face here, but despite her constant attempts to hound and interrogate him, Nagino stands there silently, staring at his former student Yuki up above in the roots. Choosing to ignore the girls and instead walk right past them, Nagino begins to speak quietly, as if almost to himself. Nagino explains that because prayer formation technique has the ability to create multiple different layers all within what is technically one barrier, there must be an additional type of veil placed over Yuki that's resistant to outside attacks. And sure, this kind of barrier can normally not be destroyed by external force, but there has to be some kind of weak spot placed outside of the barrier for equivalent exchange purposes. Nagino, thinking back to a time before all of this happened, he remembers when Yuki was just learning how to use this cursed technique. Yuki consulted Nagino about where would be the best place to hide such a weak point, and Nagino did his best to try and tell Yuki not to ever reveal the location of that to anyone, not even to him, and to pick his own, as once chosen, it can never be changed. Despite this, Yuki still begged his sensei for advice on where to place it, claiming he would just change it after he got the idea. To which Nagino hesitantly obliged. And closing his eyes and sighing, Nagino says out loud what he told Yuki all that time ago. On the side of the barrier, somewhere within reach of the user's dominant hand. In one swipe, suddenly the barrier around Yuki shatters. The realization that his former pupil still chose the location Nagino gave him, even after he told Yuki not to trust him, just makes Nagino even more sad than he already was. Reaching into the roots and plucking Yuki from his prison, Nagino returns to Rindo and Nobara, placing the boy's unconscious body beside them, claiming, unfortunately, that's the only real kind of help he can offer at this point. And as he stands, beginning to make his way out of the sanctum, Saki Rindo continues to yell at him, screaming about why Nagino thinks he can just turn around and start helping them now, of all times. But all Nagino can do, again, is smile, turning to his former student and telling her not to lose, before he continues to make his way out of the cornerstone. Just before Rindo can chase after him though, Panda appears and stops her, saying it's probably best if she leaves Nagino be for the moment, especially since they still haven't finished taking care of the barrier. But in the final hallway, as Nagino exits, he begins to stumble and fall, almost dropping to the floor unconscious if his old friend Masamichi Yaga wasn't there to catch him. As Nagino's life begins to fade from his eyes, the former principal wonders if this is what happens when someone breaks a binding vow. As these two former allies share in their final moments, Nagino thinks back to his students, but especially back to his lover, Sarah. Yaga is upset, but Nagino admits this is as good of an ending as he could have ever asked for, especially after the choices he made. In the end, Nagino's happy, because now he's actually able to understand a little bit about how Sarah felt before she died. That feeling of caring about people so much you'd be willing to trade your own life for theirs. Even though he had to destroy his reputation to do it, at the very least, Nagino was able to help his students somewhat in the end. And as Nagino slips away, Yaga holds and comforts his friend until the end, reassuring Nagino that his sacrifice will not go in vain. Back outside the Crimson Tree, an almost hysterical, bordering on visceral madness Rosetsu begins roaring to the sky, cursing such a fool like Nagino for betraying him when all of Rosetsu's greatest dreams were almost in grasp. Yuji sees another opening while Rosetsu's distracted, but the irate special grade slashes Yuji out of range, demanding Sukuna's vessel to not get cocky. With Nagino's betrayal, the sorcerers now preparing to launch an attack on the cornerstone from within, and the fact that Rosetsu wasted all of his time getting the ingredients for the king's vessel just for it to be useless, all of this brings Rosetsu's emotions to boil. Rosetsu begins to spiral as everything he's planned for begins to crumble before his eyes, coming to a crossroads, before suddenly the atmosphere of the entire barrier begins to grow silent. With all eyes focused on Rosetsu, time seems to stop almost entirely, all of his stress popping. But the cursed spirit instead takes one last second to deep inhale, recomposing himself, and then exhaling. In another location of the barrier, during this sinister pause, just outside of the Crimson Tree, Megami has finally managed to pull himself to the cornerstone despite his fatigue. Unfortunately, unlike Nobara and Rindo, when Megami arrives, the outer throne is not empty, and he finds himself face to face with the king's vessel, whose toxic miasma begins to exert itself over the young sorcerer. Out of pure fear and a realization there's no way he can put up a fight against this type of enemy, Megami opts to resorting to use that, which is, you know, obviously Maharaga. noting that even if he gets taken out in the process, its power should at least be enough to destroy the barrier's cornerstone and finish the mission as well. However, despite all of this caution and emergency planning, right as all of this tension reaches its peak, the king's vessel merely chuckles to itself and, before long, ultimately turns to make its leave without a single word or action, leaving Megami utterly bewildered and confused, but seeing no other option but to accept this random bit of luck, begins to head inside the Crimson Tree with the last of his strength to go help his friends. And getting back to Yuji, Rosetsu's mood takes a sudden change after this breath, the curse going from absolutely infuriated to pure happiness and joy in a second, leaving Yuji speechless as Rosetsu begins to release echoes of laughter that carry throughout the entire domain. As not too long after, the Grand Kyushu's barrier begins to surge and expand once more, finally achieving its third and almost complete state, something that can be felt by every sorcerer all over, even inside the Crimson Tree's core, as in that exact moment, the toxic miasma of the inner sanctum becomes so heavy and dense, Nobara, Rindo, and even Yaga are unable to withstand its pressure, all of their cornerstone shards shattering at once under the atmosphere. And because Panda is the only one who doesn't technically meet the criteria's barrier against humans, he is the only one left standing in the tree's core, and soon enough, he is overwhelmingly surrounded by buffed cursed minions. Meanwhile, the cornerstone itself's veil has become so powerful, its concentrated curse energy is enough to obliterate anything that comes into contact with it, putting Panda in an unwinnable situation. As everything comes to a head at once, Yuji realizes this random outburst from Rosetsu is more than misplaced confidence, who now, with full intentions of killing Yuji, calls back every minion that he spread across Kyushu besides the one inside the tree, reducing all of them down to base cursed energy and drawing all of that in to reveal every single curse Rosetsu creates is merely just an extension of his own base power. And by returning all of those minions to their source, Rosetsu can return to his true form and awaken his ultimate power. But as this process is going on, suddenly, Rosetsu finds himself interrupted by the arrival of the king's vessel. Confused as to why it would show up now of all times, it's almost as if the king's vessel stood there in pure defiance of everything Rosetsu stood for. But the special grade decides not to worry, telling the king's vessel if it doesn't want to follow orders, it too can return to him and become absorbed, which only serves to boost Rosetsu's quote-unquote perfect form significantly in strength, due to the addition of 2 Sukuna fingers worth of energy, mutating Rosetsu beyond his normal appearance and shifting his shape into a more monstrous, larger size that emanates an extreme level of aura, making Yuji believe this kind of curse breaks the scale of anything he's ever faced before, wondering to himself if it's even possible to exercise a special grade curse of this category. Unfortunately though, Yuji doesn't seem to have much choice in the matter, as once Rosetsu's transformation completes, he sets his sights on Itadori solely, calling Yuji his final entertainment before Rosetsu claims his spot at the top of existence, calling the death of Sukuna's vessel the torchlighting that will celebrate the end to all of humanity. Meanwhile, as all things seem to reach an inevitable end, miraculously, inside the cornerstone, Kaito Yuki begins to awake, regaining consciousness after being separated from the tree's roots. Realizing that Panda is the only one left fighting, Yuki snaps to quickly, getting back to his feet. Panda is relieved, however, that relief would quickly fade once Yuki fully grasped the situation and saw everyone unconscious, realizing that none of this would have happened if he didn't get caught. Seeing no way out, Yuki turns to Panda and, out of guilt, requests that Panda kill him, not just to atone, but to end everything once and for all. Almost too similar to how Sarah Kozuki lost her life. Suddenly, Yaga regains consciousness, yelling at Yuki to never talk like that, as there needs to be some other way to stop all of this. Yaga refusing to let 2 people Nagino loved lose their lives because of Rosetsu. With no other solution in sight though, all of the sorcerers are at a complete loss. That is, until Fushiguro Megami slumps his barely limping body into the inner sanctum at that moment, surprising everyone at the terrible state he was able to travel in. Unfortunately, Megami loses consciousness right as he wanders inside, but he does manage to make out one sentence that explains to Yuki he can still take control of the barrier from Rosetsu. The information is incomplete though, and although vague, it is enough to re-inspire Yaga and Panda to keep fighting the minions and protect Yuki, telling him to stop and think about what Megami meant by take back control. As Yuki looks down unsure of himself, Yaga calls back and reminds him that Itadori is also probably out there fighting somewhere, facing off against Rosetsu, telling him this is their last shot to end it all. And just as Yaga claimed, Yuji is giving it his all in this battle against perfect Rosetsu. However, the student is absolutely overwhelmed and getting utterly decimated under the weight of Rosetsu's blows. Rosetsu is continually beating Itadori down, telling the boy it's best if he simply stops struggling and just accepts his loss, as the world Rosetsu envisioned is already coming true. And now that Rosetsu has the chance to brag again, he definitely does, claiming even if it takes him generation after generation, he does not care how many humans he needs to go through. In this new world of curses, all humans will exist as livestock to be harvested in order to manufacture and craft the ultimate curse technique, forcing the slaves to procreate, compare genetics, and procreate again, raising the children under constant torture and making them live under continuous duress to ensure they've harnessed the purest of negative energies, refusing to cease until all cursed energy and power has been stolen by Rosetsu. And while the curse monologues, Yuki is left to rack his brain as quickly as possible to decipher this code Fushiguro left for him. But it isn't until Yuki puts together why he, like Panda, is also unaffected by the barrier's miasma that he discovers exactly what Megami was trying to tell him. Yuki can take control of the barrier back, literally, because it's his technique. The technique does not affect its user, and if Yuki's not being drained by its toxins, he must be able to reach out and touch the cornerstone and regain dominance over the Grand Barrier. However, when saying this, Yaga and Panda try to remind Yuki that its current defense system might obliterate him on contact, as Panda almost lost his own arm trying to push through the shield. However, ignoring their warnings, Yuki resolves himself, making a break for the cornerstone and throwing his body into the torrent of cursed energy, thinking that if Yuji can risk his life, he should be able to do it too. Forcing his hand through the barrier's extreme defenses, he refuses to let the pain and harm dissuade him, declaring aloud that he will become a Jujutsu sorcerer just as capable as Itadori, stealing his emotions as Yuki begins to pierce the cornerstone's barrier. Simultaneously, Yuji is once again getting smacked around by Rosetsu, and the curse's arrogant personality begins to take over again. He wonders if he was too hasty dissolving the king's vessel into energy, and that maybe if he keeps Yuji alive, he can try and remake the king's vessel at some point in the future. As Rosetsu ponders and muses to himself, the fallen Yuji slowly begins to drift out of consciousness, blinking and finding himself awakened actually inside of Sukuna's domain. Unable to explain why he's ended up here, he looks up to see the King of Curses exactly where he always is, atop the domain's throne. Unsure if this is some type of afterlife, Yuji asks Sukuna what the two of them are even doing here, and as if completely ignoring the question, Sukuna just admits it's quite boring to see the boy so narrowly escape death in such a convenient way, which only serves to confuse Yuji, who, by the next time he blinks, finds himself again back inside of the Kyushu barrier, standing off against Rosetsu. Back just where he was before Rosetsu finished his monologue. The curse laughs to itself as he watches Itadori pick himself back up, asking just what Yuji could possibly manage to do now, when, like clockwork, the light of the barrier as a whole changes in one flash. Suddenly, in an instant, all of the domain's color and environment shift in tone. Immediately, all of the momentum inside of this domain switches, which leaves Rosetsu stunned, and Yuji, whose wounds begin to heal and stamina returns, recognizes this familiar feeling of support flowing through him. Getting back into his fighting stance, Yuji knows what this is, thanking his friend Kaito Yuki, knowing wherever Yuki is now, he's out there fighting just like Yuji is. And with that thought reassuring him, bringing Yuji back to 100%, Yuji once again reminds Rosetsu he will be the one to kill him. And left dumbfounded that his domain was able to be overwritten, Rosetsu is in complete disbelief, shouting how this could be possible, that he did everything right, and there's no way he could be losing after coming this close. But with the reversal of roles, Rosetsu is now unable to keep up with Itadori's strikes and combos, forcing the special grade's life to flash before its eyes, wondering where in all of the numerous pathways and choices that were made did Rosetsu possibly make the mistake that led to this outcome. And Yuji begins to enter the zone, his punches against Rosetsu switching into black flashes, utterly decimating the curse from the damage and choking it up. And as the curse loses grip on life, Rosetsu asks Yuji what he ever did to make him stand in Rosetsu's way. And as Yuji charges up his final punch, this last breather Yuji takes to answer Rosetsu's question. Why is Yuji standing in Rosetsu's way? Well, because he's a curse spirit, and Yuji's a Jujutsu sorcerer. That's all there will ever be to it. And in that moment, the decisive strike lands, eviscerating Rosetsu in one final blow and scattering his cursed core into multiple pieces, eliminating the special grade curse for good, as so too does the crimson tree of the Grand Barrier begin to fade and wither away. As all of the veils dissipate, revealing the actual night sky above, Yuji collapses on his back, wondering if it's really okay to rest now, since everything's all said and done. Yuji drifts off and officially loses consciousness for good. Sometime after, Yuji wakes up in Oita's Jujutsu precinct. His brother, Aoi Todo, is the first face he sees, making his best friend extremely happy that Yuji was able to recover. Yuji asks if they really won, and Todo confirms this, reassuring that his brother has successfully exorcised Rosetsu, and the Grand Kyushu barrier was stopped. Despite collateral damage to the city, and unfortunately the injuring of multiple civilians, luckily there weren't at least any deaths, and life in Fukuoka will begin to return to normal before it knows. Especially thanks to Ichichi spreading the fake news of a freak gas leak as well as a potential volcano eruption. Most of the locals were more than willing to evacuate, and thankfully probably won't have many questions to ask about what occurred in the area. With Yuji confirmed safe, Todo says it's time he also makes his leave, as all of the other Kyoto students have already left, and only he refused to leave without confirming Yuji's status. Yuji's glad Todo was able to be here, thanking him for somehow always being there when Yuji needs him most. But Todo reminds Yuji that they're bound together by fate and that their souls will always lead them towards each other during their most fierce of battles. Using actual logic and reason, Yuji tries to remind Todo he was only here because of an idol concert, but Todo laughs that off, claiming that, if anything, it's even more proof the universe will always find a way to bring them together. And with all of that out of the way, Yuji asks Yaga if he's able to visit Yuki, since they're going to be leaving Fukuoka soon. But much to Ichichi and Yaga's hesitation to tell him, they see no other way but to admit to Itadori they're not sure if Yuki will ever wake up, revealing that once the barrier fell, Yuki entered a comatose state that none of the Jujutsu doctors are sure if he'll ever recover from, which terrifies Yuji at the thought and makes him severely depressed. Meanwhile, in another location of Oita, Nobara comforts Rindo as she mourns the loss of her former principal Nagino. With Nobara leaving Fukuoka to head back to Tokyo, she wonders just what Rindo plans to do now, with Fukuoka surely set for dissolvement after this. And Rindo admits that despite Fukuoka's school closing, she won't be leaving the area anytime soon, admitting there will always be curses to exercise and missions to handle that she can participate and help out with. Rindo says even though she's not quite sure what her sensei meant in the end, or what he might have even been thinking and feeling, she can at least hold on to the promise she made to never lose, claiming that she's going to be doing such great things over here, they'll have no choice but to acknowledge Rindo all the way from Tokyo, making Nobara more than happy to hear that her friend has already moved on, admitting she wouldn't forgive Rindo for choosing to go any other way. Both of the girls promising to remain friends and always do their best. Sometime later or before, deep within the mountain range of Kyushu, tiny fragments of what used to be a curse begin to pull themselves together and reform. Humiliated and defeated, the reshaped and extremely weakened Rosetsu emerges, having just barely survived everything at the last minute. Annoyed that he's going to have to start everything over from scratch, Rosetsu is at least relieved he'll be able to survive and start recovering, especially since he was somehow able to remove and hold on to Sukuna's fingers, knowing that as long as he has these, another grand barrier can't be that far off from creation. However, just then, Rosetsu hears someone call out behind him, making the curse shudder in fear, only to be extremely relieved when he sees the person sneaking up on him is just Mahito, recognizing this curse as one of Kenjaku's allies. Mahito mockingly congratulates Rosetsu on such a spectacular loss, and since he's in no position to really argue right now, Rosetsu simply takes the bullying, merely happy to see luck is still on his side and thankful he encountered a friend during this escape. But hearing this confuses Mahito, who starts to laugh when he realizes Rosetsu hasn't caught on to what's happening yet. He corrects the curse and tells Rosetsu that he's not here to help. He's only come to collect what they had so politely lent to Rosetsu in the first place, since Geto doesn't believe in second chances, you know? This makes Rosetsu panic, knowing the Sukuna fingers are the only hope he has left of returning to adequate power. He immediately runs away with his tail between his legs, splitting off into multiple curse residuals and trying to hide amongst the fragments, just like he's done so many times before to fake his death. Unfortunately for Rosetsu, this time, he's faced with a foe who can see right through this facade. Mahito able to simply find Rosetsu's soul amongst all of these clouds, instantly picking out Rosetsu's essence from the miasma and grabbing onto his head, making him reform against Rosetsu's will inside of Mahito's grasp, acting as one last nail in the coffin for Rosetsu, whose tried and trusted escape plan, the very same that's allowed him to weasel his way across multiple generations, has finally failed him. As the curse quivers, trembling in fear, unable to even utter a word in Mahito's presence, the curse born from humanity's hatred places a smiling head next to Rosetsu's, letting him in on the little secret that no matter what, the price of using Sukuna's fingers was always going to be his life. Rosetsu's final moments filled with pure horror as he tries to scream, but idle transfiguration destroys the curse's body and soul beyond recognition before a sound can even escape the curse's mouth. Meeting back up with Kenjaku afterward, Mahito returns to Sukuna fingers before asking why Kenjaku didn't just want to absorb Rosetsu for a future plan. But according to Kenjaku, while curse technique snatch can be impactful, it's mostly useless for what they have planned next, as Rosetsu's already given them everything they needed, revealing that Kenjaku's ultimate goal out of all of this was the blueprint for a complex barrier that housed multiple layers, each with their own conditions and traits, which is the exact project that he and the disaster curses will be using to commit the Shibuya incident later on in October. A great way of tying this mobile game into the grand canon as a whole. Meanwhile, at some other random unknown time, amongst an all-white void of emptiness, a confused Kaito Yuki begins to awake, wondering if this place he's found himself in is the afterlife. However, even if this is the case, Yuki admits he's more than willing to accept this fate and take accountability for the mistakes he's made. Surprisingly though, Yuki realizes he isn't alone in this void, and that there's someone else staring at him far off into the distance. Squinting, it's almost as if this person was reaching out to him, and even though he doesn't know who it is, it's clear this image he's seeing is of Sarah Kozuki, Nagino's late wife. Sarah's hand grabs onto Yuki and begins to pull him from the abyss. And Yuki, confused, tries to ask the person to wait and why aren't they coming with him before everything goes black. The very next day, the Tokyo Jujutsu trio wait at the bus stop for a shuttle to take them back to the airport. The three of them trying their best to bid farewell to Rindo, who is just bawling her eyes out beyond belief and isn't hiding the fact she just wants Nobara to stay. As Nobara does her best to smack some sense into Rindo, trio, Megumi is trying to rush everyone onto the shuttle so they can stop procrastinating, which makes Yuji upset since he won't be able to see Yuki off before he wakes up. But like clockwork, a familiar voice calls out to the trio just before they board their bus, revealing Kaito Yuki had just woken up from his coma in time to see his new friends off. Everyone's surprised since they thought Yuki would never be able to wake up, and Yuki admits he thought so too. However, for some unknown reason, he regained consciousness with next to no side effects. Now that they can actually say goodbye, Yuki takes this chance to formally thank Yuji, admitting that he never would have found the courage to take control of Rosetsu's barrier if Yuji never inspired him, which parallels their very first battle at the beginning of this story, because Yuji smirks and throws it right back to Yuki that if he never took control of the barrier, Yuji never would have been able to beat Rosetsu. But instead of last time, where Yuki chose to beat himself up and feel all woe is me, Yuki admits that before, when he was just working for Nagino, he had no real purpose as a sorcerer. Following laws were the only thing that made Yuki feel grounded. But after he met Yuji, Yuki knows that's not at all what a real Jujutsu sorcerer is. Following laws means nothing in the face of exercising curses. And what really makes a Jujutsu sorcerer is having the courage to keep fighting no matter what the circumstances are. Yuki promises he'll never forget that lesson, holding on to that conviction and declaring he'll one day become a Jujutsu sorcerer just as capable as Yuji. Because the one thing Yuki never wants to do is die with regrets. A quote that catches Yuji off guard, but at the same time puts the biggest of smiles on his face, admitting Yuji's got quite the reputation to uphold now, if that's how Yuki feels. The two friends shaking hands and acknowledging one another's philosophy. Two people who started this journey off as enemies, vowing to do their best and promising to see each other soon, and ending this journey as friends. As the Tokyo trio re-arrive at home, they're met at their destination by their sensei Gojo, who's more than excited to hear all about their mission and how they managed to exercise another special grade. But the students aren't stupid and they cut right through Gojo's crap, asking him why he's really here. And the honored one can't lie. He admits, other than triumphantly congratulating his students, he's actually here to accept the souvenirs they so obviously got for Gojo on their trip, which makes everyone speechless because they realize that amongst everything they did, in fact, forget to bring the now very sad Gojo Sensei his souvenirs. And that is all she wrote. The end of Jujutsu Kaisen Phantom Parade, an amazing mobile game that had no right to have a story as good as it was. At least until they decide to cook up some kind of season 2 for it. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.